Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 1461. The Godly Genius Named Maha. Master Feng's expression was cold as he stared at Maha the warrior. If the huge mountain had been split open, even if it later closed, it should have left a crack behind. However, with just a light step by Master Feng, the crack running down breaking Cloud Mountain began to heal itself just like a human's wound would do. Even though his opponent was only a world lord, he represented the invader side. This person must be an individual of great significance, so Master Feng did not choose to immediately attack. The collapse of the Sighing Wall was completely beyond everyone's expectations. Furthermore, the spring race was destroyed too quickly for the celestial position to take any action to prevent it. It was only to be expected that after the sacred race had occupied the three supreme worlds, they would rapidly advance, taking over one supreme world after another. Given their current strength, the sacred race could easily achieve their goal without difficulty. However, it was at this moment, that instead of advancing they had suddenly begun negotiations. Even the supreme lords were puzzled. They wondered what the sacred race was trying to achieve. Haha, the rumors said that, although he is a supreme lord, the heavenly destiny this old man carries is very special. He has the strength to fight a true god. It seems like the rumors are true. Maha slowly rubbed his nose and said thoughtfully. Although the 10 godly geniuses sometimes secretly called the head of the celestial position race, old man, in the entire universe only Xenia dared to call him that publicly. This Maha was merely world lord, yet he spoke so casually. He respected the head of the celestial position in his words, however, in fact, everyone could tell just how arrogant he was. A mere world lord dares to act so presumptuously. The dignified sacred race isn't that big of a deal. The supreme lord of Oracle could also bear it no longer. Her beautiful face clouded with gloom. After being scolded by Supreme Lord of Oracle, Maha remained calm. He turned his head to take in the appearance of Supreme Lord of Oracle, and then clicked his tongue twice. It's said that among the 4 greatest Supreme Lords in the universe, Supreme Lord of Oracle is known for her unrivaled beauty. Seeing is believing. Even as he spoke, Maha didn't bother to conceal the lewd and evil intent lurking in his eyes. How dare you? Supreme Lord Helm was unable to watch any longer. With a flip of his hand, he sent a slap flying. When a Supreme Lord took action, the world would be destroyed. This slap contained sufficient power to kill a world lord. In his anger, Supreme Lord Helm did not hold himself at all. Boom! The slap from Supreme Lord Helm had transformed into a gigantic golden palm image. However, Maha didn't show the slightest sign of panic. As he stood there on the spot, a faint treasure light emerged from his body. The palm shadow suddenly struck Maha's light and it instantly shattered, disappearing without a trace. When the other Supreme Lords saw this, they all frowned. Supreme Lord Helm was one of the top 3 Supreme Lords in the Humanity Alliance, second only to Supreme Lord Illusion and Supreme Lord of Oracle. The slap might seem a simple thing, but it contained the ultimate wind law. If it was so easily blocked, then this Maha was definitely in possession of a great treasure. A great treasure that could block an all-out attack of a Supreme Lord didn't exist anywhere in the universe. Truly, no power in the universe could compare to what the sacred race had. Humph, a trivial mid-rank Supreme Lord dares to attack me. You really overestimate yourself. Maha mocked as he stared defiantly at Supreme Lord Helm. A Supreme Lord's temperament wasn't easily shaken, but at this moment, Supreme Lord Helm was extremely angry, his complexion already becoming ugly. A mere world lord dared to speak so rudely and to humiliate Supreme Lord of Oracle. The most insulting part was that even though Maha was a world lord, he wasn't even 100 years old. And the Supreme Lords that stood in front of Maha were easily over 10 million years old. This Maha is courting death, Nathan said coldly. Isn't this guy too arrogant? Lawson's expression had now also turned unfriendly. The 2 Supreme Lords that clashed with Maha were not Supreme Lords of thoughtless minds, but, after all, they were humans and they were in the same universe. These godly geniuses were of an age where their blood ran hot. Naturally, they could not remain calm and unperturbed like the Supreme Lords. Even Zen's complexion had darkened. Just what sort of strength did Maha have to act so arrogantly in front of these Supreme Lords? You're courting death. This time, Supreme Lord Helm was planning on taking serious action. However, just as Supreme Lord Helm was about to make his move, the 9 Supreme Lords from Sacred Race that had been floating in the distance all descended. Of these 9 Supreme Lords from Sacred Race, there were actually 5 mid-rank Supreme Lords. 4 of them were top-rank Supreme Lords. At the moment Supreme Lord Helm was about to make his move, a top-ranked Supreme Lord from Sacred Race blocked his path. The battle was about to begin. The Supreme Lords in the universe had the numerical advantage. Once they attacked, with over 50 Supreme Lords working together, they should be able to completely devour every single one of these Supreme Lords from Sacred Race. But, who could guarantee that the Sacred Race would not have reinforcements? If a true god from the Sacred Race appeared, how would they be able to resist? With a flash of her body, Supreme Lord of Oracle lightly brushed past Supreme Lord Helm with her hands, dissolving his attack. With a cold expression, she looked at Maha and said, I want to hear what exactly you want to negotiate. The nature and results of the negotiation will decide whether you'll die or live. As one of the most powerful Supreme Lords in the universe, when had Supreme Lord of Oracle ever had to fear for her life? She was the only female of the leaders of the 3 great human forces, and with just her power alone, she had carried almost the entire burden of the Humanity Alliance. However, there had to be strange things in this abnormal situation. Maha wasn't an idiot. Even if he was, the 9 Supreme Lords from Sacred Race beside him weren't. Those who behaved arrogantly usually had a reason to act that way. Supreme Lord of Oracle's attitude was resolute. If Maha were really an idiot, speaking nonsense in front of her, Supreme Lord of Oracle would naturally take his life. Ha ha, Maha faintly smiled. However, this fellow continued to speak to Supreme Lord Helm, you still seem unconvinced. A Supreme Lord of Humanity Alliance, I've never heard of you even though I've searched many souls. You can't be that famous in the universe, right? To deal with you, all I need to do is to carry a heavenly destiny. If I become a true god in the future, I will kill you with just one finger. After the Sacred Race had invaded the Spring Race, they began to search the souls of the warriors. They gathered a lot of information from the universe. They also gained a good understanding of the power distribution within the universe. After he finished speaking, he extended his little finger and pointed it at Supreme Lord Helm. Reckless. This time, even Supreme Lord of Oracle couldn't tolerate this. A massive aura suddenly swept out. She didn't choose to directly attack, she only wanted Maha to suffer. Her extremely sharp aura was an attack that was powered by her soul. The secret soul technique had become a patch of thorny roses that rapidly shot towards Maha's head. However, the Supreme Lord from Sacred Race standing in front of Maha suddenly waved both of his hands. A pale purple light wrapped around his hands, and he began to tear apart all of the roses one by one. Physical attacks normally could not be directed at the soul, but this Supreme Lord from Sacred Race was able to do just that. In the blink of an eye, all of the roses had been crushed. Maha faintly smiled and was about to speak when an intense pain enveloped his mind. His entire body instantly fell to the ground and he began to wail. Supreme Lord of Oracle stared at Maha coldly. She had held back just now. Otherwise, she would have completely destroyed Maha's soul. This is great. This fellow should be taught a lesson. He has probably been tortured quite miserably. Seeing Maha's miserable condition, Lawson and the others felt their hearts start to swell with joy. After Maha had rolled on the ground for a good while, the pain gradually dissipated. As he slowly got to his feet, a trace of blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. Maha wiped away the blood, but still retained a smile on his face. Ha ha, a beauty gifted me flowers that left behind a lingering fragrance. It was probably Maha's plan to continue insulting them. But, that Supreme Lord from Sacred Race that stood in front of Maha finally couldn't help but remind him. Godly genius, don't play with them. Let's get down to business. Godly genius, is this guy also a godly genius? His cultivation is much higher than ours. This is unfair. Upon hearing this form of address, Lucille and the rest were also stunned. Now that the 10 godly geniuses from the universe had been selected, the one with the highest cultivation was Nathan, who was only at the middle stage of the Spirit Supreme Realm. As for the others, they were still at the early stage of the Spirit Supreme Realm. As Margaret had entered the illusion battlefield, she had not gone through any serious battles or experiences, and her cultivation was still only at the late stage of the Soul Sea Realm. But this Maha, who was also a godly genius, was actually a world lord. The guy who could break through to the true God realm at any time. Now, Zen and the others finally understood why Maha was so confident. Chapter 1462, Failure of Negotiation. Maha must be of a remarkably high status as the Supreme Lords were so respectful towards him. He had already been as strong as a world lord, which was probably why it was not too difficult for him to get a heavenly destiny in another universe. He was not a Supreme Lord, but a godly genius. Maha had the true qualifications to become a true god. Maha wiped the blood off his mouth, shook his head, and said, "I've come here on behalf of the sacred race and I have only one goal this time." "Just tell us," Supreme Lord of Oracle said coldly. She was clutching the small, exquisite sword in her hand so tight, and the knuckles of her hand were almost white. If both sides fell out, she would kill him immediately. But Maha was a godly genius with the potential to become a true god. Since the sacred race had dared send him to negotiate, they must definitely have a way to protect him. Maha smiled faintly as he said, "The truth is that we do not like to fight and kill. We shouldn't use force to resolve this matter if we can help it. This is too barbaric." "Oh, you mean that the sacred race will withdraw from our universe?" Supreme Lord of Oracle asked. The other Supreme Lords listened attentively, not knowing just what Maha was up to. Every race in the universe would be quite relieved if the members of the sacred race were to leave the universe. Maha shook his head. "There are over 100,000 supreme worlds in this universe, with vast lands and sparse population. Our sacred race has a countless number of descendants. We can establish our own sect here and coexist harmoniously with you. What do you think?" Everyone was shocked at Maha's words. Zen sneered. What Maha said was surprising and his intention was unfathomable. The sacred race was much stronger than many races in the universe. If this race passed through the Sighing Wall and established their own sect here, they could easily take control of this universe with their firm backing and support. "Personally, I think this plan is really good," Maha said with a broad smile. Supreme Lord of Oracle looked solemn as she turned to look at the head of the celestial position race who was standing beside her. Master Feng mirrored Supreme Lord of Oracle's expression. These Supreme Lords were communicating with each other through the life vitality. They had understood what the sacred race was planning on doing the moment Maha had proposed this plan. The sacred race never lost an opportunity to invade the universe, but right now, they didn't want an all-out war. If the Supreme Lords agreed to Maha's request, they could give Zen and the other godly geniuses more time. As long as 2 or 3 of the 10 godly geniuses became true gods, they would have a chance to change the fate of the entire universe. The sacred race was formidable, but they came from another universe, not the divine land. The Supreme Lords discussed this matter for a long time, during which many of them began to argue among themselves. Maha was showing great patience. He had both hands behind his back as his gaze swept past the Supreme Lords and landed on Zen and the others, observing them carefully. When the sacred race had invaded the universe, they had slaughtered a number of members of the spring race. They had obtained a lot of information after searching their souls continuously. The 10 godly geniuses were publicly known throughout the universe, and Maha had a good understanding of who these young people were. Maha knew that the hope of the universe rested on these little fellows. But Maha didn't feel like taking the risk of killing them. Although he didn't care too much about his own safety, he would be in a spot if he acted right now and the Supreme Lords attacked him. His life was more precious than the lives of these godly geniuses. "We can agree to their plan. This plan is beneficial to us. As long as we prevent them from taking any action at this moment, Nathan will eventually become a true god. What we only lack is time." Some of the Supreme Lords agreed with Maha's demands, including Supreme Lord of Original Sin. He had put too much effort into cultivating Nathan, so he had a great deal of confidence in him. But the other Supreme Lords were against it. "This kind of compromise is just futile. We should counterattack and block them off from the edge of the Supreme Worlds. And we should not give them any chance to enter the universe. Pinning our hopes on someone else's kindness is very foolish." The Supreme Lords held differing opinions on this issue and continuously argued with each other. However, the head of the celestial position race was silent the whole time. The Supreme Lords, having found it impossible to persuade each other, turned to look at the head of the celestial position race. Supreme Lord of Oracle, Supreme Lord of Original Sin and Supreme Lord of Thunder Punishment were on a level with the head of the celestial position race. As top-ranked Supreme Lords, they carried the heavenly destiny which was far more powerful than that of an ordinary Supreme Lord. But the head of the celestial position race was more influential in terms of prestige. After all, he was the successor of the holy being's disciple. Seeing that everyone was looking at him, he said through the life vitality, "I think. Have you missed something?" The Supreme Lords looked at each other, but most of them did not figure out what they had missed. Supreme Lord of Oracle said, "They are not willing to make a move." Master Feng nodded. "Yes. And why are they unwilling to make a move? If the sacred race truly had absolute strength, Maha wouldn't have brought those Supreme Lords from another universe here to negotiate with them. The sacred race could directly gather true gods to occupy the Supreme Worlds one by one. Negotiation meant a lack of confidence and strength. Do you mean to say that the sacred race does not dare to fight?" Supreme Lord of Original Sin asked. "I'm willing to take a gamble," the head of the Celestial Position race nodded. There was nothing in this world that they could be absolutely sure of. Since the opponent was willing to negotiate, it meant that they did not wish to start an all-out war. Plain and simple. Many Supreme Lords continued to think about it, their faces betraying none of their thoughts. If they truly agreed to Maha's request, the sacred race might not comply with their agreement. An all-out war would erupt once the sacred race was ready for battle. After all, the strong would never need to reason with the weak. And by then, it would be too late for regrets. But how would they deal with it if an agreement couldn't be reached during the negotiation? What would they do if the sacred race launched an attack? But the head of the Celestial Position race was willing to take a big gamble. He believed that the sacred race wouldn't dare make a move, that Zen and the others would be able to return from the divine refinement Forbidden Land, making great progress in cultivation in a short period of time, and that they could become world lords and true gods, even. Once the Supreme Lords had carefully analyzed this matter, they understood that the head of the Celestial Position race was right. It would be a shame if they temporarily appeased the sacred race but ended up dead. They might as well take a gamble right now and stop these people at the edge of the Supreme Worlds from moving an inch further. The Supreme Lords quickly came to an agreement. The head of the Celestial Position race glanced at Maha once again. Maha knew that this group of Supreme Lords had reached an agreement, but he still smiled and asked, "So? What about my suggestion?" To him, the humans and the ogres were inferior races. These races didn't have a noble purpose of survival. In fact, they would compromise anything and everything in order to survive. But Master Feng responded, "There are many races in the universe, and no supreme world is superfluous. I represent all the forces in the universe as I reject your plan." Maha's cynical smile disappeared at Master Feng's words. He was cursing him from within, but his voice was calm as he threatened Master Feng. "You have only one chance." Everything would have been okay if Maha hadn't made such threatening remarks. But at his words, Master Feng and the other Supreme Lords laughed. When one became a Supreme Lord, their mental states became stable as steel. Their decision couldn't change that easily. Maha's threat had exposed the fact that the sacred race had not enough confidence and strength. Even Zen and the others saw that the sacred race was bluffing. "We don't need the sacred race giving us opportunities. You can start a war if you have the guts." Lawson laughed coldly. Of these 10 godly geniuses, Lawson was the most eccentric. In fact, his character was somewhat similar to Maha's. He couldn't help but mock Maha's long rambling. The failure of this negotiation infuriated Maha. His anger only multiplied at Lawson's words. His purple eyes shone with lightning. "You are just a spirit supreme realm warrior. How dare you interrupt us like that? I must teach you a lesson on behalf of your elders." As his voice fell, the lightning in Maha's eyes formed an arc in the air. Before anyone could react, it shot towards Lawson. Chapter 1463, Deterrence. This bolt of lightning was strange. It did not connect with the vitality between heaven and earth, nor did it use life vitality. It looked like it was being transferred from Maha's mind. The shape of the lightning was quite different from the ones in the universe. Maha had said he would teach Lawson a lesson, but the power of this bolt of lightning was beyond just that. It was extraordinary. All the Supreme Lords in the universe restrained themselves this time. Maha belonged to the sacred race. His status was such that even a Supreme Lord in his race might just listen to his commands. But Maha had gone too far with his actions against a godly genius. "You're courting death. How dare you?" The patriarch of the Lai clan was the first to step out. A vigorous aura shot into the sky as the atmosphere of the breaking cloud sacred place surged. But Maha's lightning arc had already struck. It was too late to stop it. Boom! The arcing bolt of lightning pierced Lawson's body with a keening sounding, not unlike a pig being butchered. The lightning bolt didn't look overly powerful and seemed to be one that was meant to merely teach a lesson. But Lawson frantically rolled around on the ground like a twisting water snake. It was rare to see Lawson in such pain, which could only mean that the bolt of lightning was extremely tortuous. The patriarch of the Lai clan was torn between attending to Lawson's injuries and attacking Maha. A cold light flashed in the patriarch's hand, indicating the appearance of a dragon-headed saber. He raised the saber and brought it slashing down without any hesitation. The 9 supreme lords beside Maha moved into different positions. Each of them flashed a pale green ring, the lights of which quickly connected to each other. They had set up an array formation. Since supreme lords had different types of heavenly destinies, it was very rare for them to cultivate an array together. This was happening only in the universe where Zen was. In the universe where the sacred race came from, almost every supreme world was occupied by the sacred race. Small races like the humans, the demon knight, and the ogres were all concentrated in 2 or 3 supreme worlds, like pets of the sacred race. This made the sacred race a highly unified one. In this universe, however, many supreme lords couldn't choose which crown of destiny to bear. Since the crown of destiny usually appeared randomly after the fall of a supreme lord, whoever seized it would bear it. It didn't matter which rank the heavenly destiny was at. No one had a choice. As long as one could have the heavenly destiny, one became a supreme lord. There was no need for them to care too much about what kind of heavenly destiny they got. A top-rank heavenly destiny had only been selected once when the celestial position relied on Lester's heavenly destiny of revival to continuously kill and revive a supreme lord, and other races had agreed not to fight over it. But once a supreme lord of the sacred race perished, the entire race would have to wait for the next crown of destiny. Once the crown of destiny appeared in the universe, every race would rush to take it over. But the sacred race would analyze the crown of destiny and find out what heavenly destiny it contained before they took it. If this heavenly destiny was not good, they would just wait quietly and let it disappear. Before long, this crown of destiny would once again appear in another location, the heavenly destiny within this crown of destiny having undergone a new change. The sacred race used this method to replace heavenly destiny that wasn't very useful or powerful enough. Only after they managed to sift through a strong heavenly destiny would they appoint a world lord of the sacred race to receive it. This meant that the advantage of the sacred race didn't just lie in their true gods. Even a supreme lord of this race was much more qualified than a supreme lord in the universe. Because these supreme lords were familiar with each other, they were able to use their abilities to lay down a powerful array. The other supreme lords wouldn't watch on as the patriarch of Lai clan got to work. The auras of the dozens of supreme lords looked like they had solidified. Even the air seemed to have frozen. Maha let a thin smile snake across his face. He wasn't panicking even though he was facing the earth-shattering blade attack of the Lai clan patriarch. But at the center of the formation that the supreme lords of the sacred race had formed, space began to fluctuate with extreme intensity. As the saber came cutting down, a large hand suddenly appeared in the fluctuating space. It reached out and flailed for a hot minute before grabbing, shattering the Lai clan patriarch's saber light. Crack! It was not only the saber light that had broken. Countless cracks began to appear on the blade in the patriarch's hand. The blade continued to twist, and eventually turned into an iron rod. This hand clearly hadn't come into contact with the dragon-headed saber, but had produced a strange effect. What level of power that hand must have? The patriarch of Lai clan threw Maha an ugly look. The supreme lord of original sin and supreme lord of oracle looked gloomy. This dragon-headed saber was called the Varied Sea. It ranked 12th on the universe spirit tablet, and was made of material from the dark star itself. It was also not something that an ordinary supreme lord could use. Only the patriarch of the Lai clan could. Such a blade had been crushed into a steel rod and turned into a piece of scrap metal without even making contact with the huge hand. How strong must the hand be? Humph! Once the hand withdrew, an evil snort sounded off it. It spread out, causing the hearts of the supreme lords to tremble. The godly geniuses were pale as paper as they subconsciously retreated. Only Zen stood there, motionless. The true god hadn't come, but this race had managed to pressurize so many supreme lords with just a single hand. True gods were also divided into different grades. Top-rank supreme lords like Supreme Lord of Original Sin and Master Feng had the ability to fight true gods of the lowest level. After all, they were only a half step away from being a true god. But the owner of this hand seemed to be far more than just an ordinary true god. Master Feng and the others were still holding back. The truth was, if several supreme lords joined hands, they didn't need to be afraid of this giant hand. But it wasn't time for them to fight. Instead, they had to put up with them. Furthermore, Lawson had already pulled himself off the ground. His screams had been fierce, but he hadn't suffered any serious injuries. So this is a true god. Zen stared at the huge hand, his eyes narrowed. As he was sizing the hand up, Zen felt an unfriendly gaze lock onto him. It was from Maha. Their gazes met and their hearts skipped a collective beat. Maha usually looked down on these godly geniuses. But the moment he had looked at Zen, he had understood almost instantly that this was the boy that had won the illusion battlefield. Although Zen's cultivation was only at the Spirit Supreme realm, his potential was surprisingly strong. Zen's eyes were calm. As he looked at Maha, there wasn't a trace of anger in them. It was as if this was a matter of course. The two of them looked at each other for less than 3 seconds. But Zen's face contorted into a contemptuous smile. What are you laughing at? Maha was annoyed at this show of contempt. In any case, he had already broken off all decorum. Maha predicted that these supreme lords didn't dare fight here. So he addressed Zen. This Maha had come prepared today. Even if they couldn't negotiate, they would still rely on the deterrence of a true god to display their might. I'm laughing at you, a mere world lord. You can't wait to use the power of the true god behind you, and yet you feel proud of yourself. Zen asked calmly. Maha's face fell. He had long since had the opportunity to bear the heavenly destiny. At the time, there had even been a supreme heavenly destiny that would help him become a top-ranked supreme lord. But he had chosen to give it up. He would become bound by the heavens after bearing the heavenly destiny, unable to cross the heavens to become a true god. To him, the sacrifice was too great. He had the ambition to become a true god, and this ambition was now not too far away from him. Chapter 1464, Threat. As a member of the sacred race, Maha knew the divine land better than anyone else in the universe. If he could say so himself, he knew the ins and outs of the land like the back of his hand. Similar to the upper world and lower world, the universe was a lower plane compared to the divine land. The rules of cultivation in the universe were set by the holy being and no one else. Because of this, it was natural for the people of the divine land to think of themselves highly and regard the creatures of the universe as weaker and inferior to them. Even the godly geniuses had to painstakingly go through tens of millions of years of hard work just to have the qualifications to be on equal footing with the geniuses of the divine land. It took them endless blood and sweat, and a staggering massive amount of resources, just to get that far. But this was simply the natural order of things and the glaring difference that they were born with. Maha was the son of a true god. With his status and high birth, he was able to stand tall and be proud among the sacred race. However, he could never be satisfied with his current situation as long as he was still alive. He yearned for more. He wanted to set out and go to the divine land to become a true god. In the past, he had already gone to the divine refinement forbidden land where he reaped quite a lot of benefits. But it was not enough as he was still unable to become a true god, like he had wished. Actually, condensing a godly tile was a really hard feat to achieve. Zen's words were hitting the wrong chord in Maha, and it made him frown. A dangerous shadow passed over his face and sharpened his demonic eyes as a fuse of anger lit in his chest, taking over his system. Indeed, the true god of the sacred race, his father, was not able to come to this round of the universe in person due to a number of reasons. This was the very reason why the sacred race chose to negotiate instead. But this sorry bunch of old mongrels were not easily swayed and they refused his request, much to his frustration. If that is the case, why not just use the power of a true god to kill this person? Maha stunned himself when this dangerous thought surfaced to the forefront of his mind. It seemed that he had not been aware that he was terrified of Zen. Even though I'm just a world lord, killing you is still a piece of cake to me, Maha murmured with venom in his voice. He was quite a decisive man. Once he made a decision, he would always carry it out. He was a man of his own words and he always relied on his intuition and judgment. Since Zen gave him a sense of danger, there was absolutely no way he'd let him grow freely. Those 9 supreme lords also seemed to understand this godly genius temperament very well. They knew that although Maha's personality was arrogant, cruel, and ruthless, he'd never broken his promises before and would always see them through. It was just like what Maha had said. Once he became a true god, he would definitely kill that supreme lord Helam. Nothing would stop him in accomplishing that in the future. As Maha spoke, Master Feng gently waved his hand in the air. An invisible force spread out from his gesture, forming a daunting and towering high wall. Perhaps Maha wasn't even worth mentioning, but they had to be wary of that giant hand. It was the hand of a true god, after all, and they knew just how dangerous it was. The moment they lost their guard and they got hit, there was a high chance that they could not endure his blow. At that very moment, all of the supreme lords grew quiet, simmering in their own thoughts of fear. None of them wanted to provoke a powerful true god. But if they stayed idle and refused to make a move, then it would appear as if they had allowed Maha to parade around and step over them with that arrogant attitude of his. I admit, I'm not your match right now, Zen said, his smile not wavering. He continued, however, the moment I become a world lord, I swear I will only use one finger to end you. As he said this, he also extended a finger toward Maha. Maha was a tyrant among the sacred race. His father was a true god that transcended the universe, and his talent was unprecedented in the universe where the sacred race lived. This kind of words had always been thrown at others by him. What qualifications did the others have to treat him like he was a mere pest in their eyes? He'd never thought that this Zen, the man who had made him feel uneasy and a tad bit afraid, would prove to be an even more arrogant prick than he was at this moment. Unknowingly, the confrontation between the two universes gradually focused on the heated tension between Zen and Maha. The supreme lords that had gathered within the celestial position race had yet to make a move. The same was true of the supreme lords and the true god's hand standing behind Maha. Everyone was standing still with bated breaths. In the end, both of them stared the other off and hesitated to move. They didn't want to make a mistake and fall out with each other. However, with Maha's arrogant and brash personality, he was not one to care about this sort of balance. He had never been at a disadvantageous position before. When he heard Zen's words, Maha let out an icy smile. Then he controlled the giant hand behind him and launched a direct attack toward Zen. Master Feng, Supreme Lord of Oracle, Supreme Lord of Original Sin, and Supreme Lord of Thunder Punishment started moving almost simultaneously. The giant hand slammed down on Zen at a very rapid speed. Even the formless power unleashed by Master Feng was instantly torn apart, unable to block it in the slightest. Do you really think we are afraid of a true god? Supreme Lord of Oracle's expression was as cold as an Arctic ice. The short sword in her hand immediately transformed into a sharp stream of light in the air, lighting up the entire place. The stream of light split into many jagged long hooks, and, with quick succession, hooked into the giant hand. Earlier in the fight, Supreme Lord of Oracle had already witnessed the might of this giant hand, so she did not dare to underestimate its strength. She merely wanted to block its attacks. As for Supreme Lord of Thunder Punishment, he jumped into the air and morphed into a Buddha. With one quick step, he was already in front of Zen, determined to stop this giant hand. Supreme Lord of Original Sin's expression turned solemn and focused as he disappeared from where he stood, nowhere to be found. As for the other Supreme Lords, they stood in shock and were caught mentally unprepared. They could not fathom what was happening. Could it be that they were about to start a war with the sacred race right now? If the owner of this giant hand came out, how would the Supreme Lords manage to resist its powers? Soon, all of the Supreme Lords, worries banished into thin air when a new figure joined them. A peal of laughter rang in the air as a lean shadow slowly materialized in the space beside Zen. When the old man finally appeared, he extended his withering hand and tapped the palm of the giant hand with his finger. There was no contact between the two, but the giant hand seemed to have eyes. As if it could sense the power of the finger, it suddenly maneuvered differently and changed its style in midair. The fingers on the palm straightened and turned into a palm knife. The old man kept a straight face while his dexterous fingers changed their movements. He touched his thumb with his pinky finger and pointed toward the wrist of the giant hand. The hand gestures between the two constantly changed, as if two drunkards were playing a drinker's wager game. Notably, there wasn't a single substantive exchange of blows between them, which surprised the onlookers. Every time the hand changed its pattern, the old man's hand would also change along with it to counter its moves. In the end, the giant hand finally stopped moving and its attacks came to a halt. A sharp icy voice suddenly boomed from the center of the 9 Supreme Lords. I didn't expect that a disciple of a holy being like you would be hiding in the universe, fighting for your life. So you really aren't dead yet? I will never die, the old man replied with a cool smile. It's never too late, the voice bit back. The old man laughed and said, you should worry about yourself and your son's life first. We'll take his life. He did not even spare Maha any glance when he said this, like he was not anyone important to discuss. For the old man, his life wasn't worth wasting time for. As the old man's voice fell silent, Supreme Lord of Original Sin transported beside Maha, a black spear held tight in his hand which he positioned against Maha's forehead. Maha was the sacred race's godly genius and had the highest chance of becoming a true god. Not only that, he was also the true god's son. If they could kill him, then it would be extremely beneficial for everyone in the entire universe. There was a long period of tense silence before the voice spoke again, saying, if you dare to kill my son, I will leave the sacred race behind and kill you. Then I will destroy this universe. Kill him and I swear I will do as I say. A sly challenging smile made its way onto the old man's face. You really can't get here, huh? You were attacked, right? I wonder which universe had such courage. How dare them invade the universe where the sacred race lives? Or perhaps, there is another battle between two holy beings in the divine land. Master Feng had speculated that if the sacred race had absolute strength, then they wouldn't have sent Maha out to negotiate in the first place. Instead, they would have directly pushed their entire race into the universe. And now the old man solidified his speculations even more. In the universe where the sacred race resided, there was a true god who was tied down and couldn't leave. He had the responsibility to guard the universe first and foremost, so he was not able to come here in person. When they heard his words, the other supreme lords nodded their heads, suddenly hit with enlightenment. This old man had no real intent to kill Maha. At this moment, fighting them to death was neither wise nor prudent. The threat he had made to kill Maha was just a mere test. You have no right to know, the voice said in a cutting tone. The giant hand slowly withdrew, volunteering no further information. It had left Maha and the 9 supreme lords alone. Just now, the owner of this giant hand warned that should anyone dare to kill Maha, he would definitely retaliate by flattening the entire universe first. He said this not only because he was confident in his own strength, but also because he didn't consider the old man as his equal. Maha tilted his head and sneered at Supreme Lord of Original Sin, cold arrogance taking over his face. Heard that, so why aren't you moving your garbage spear away from me? Chapter 1465, Stone Forest. The sudden appearance of this elder from the celestial position made many Supreme Lords feel delighted and extremely happy. They never imagined nor expected that there would be a true god in the celestial position. Relief washed over them, for it was a great help for them. However, the sacred race's true god left unhurriedly, leaving his son here, which meant that the other side did not take this true god of the celestial position seriously. As for Supreme Lord of Original Sin, a smile appeared on his face as he heard Maha's words. Your father just won't let you die. Get out. After his words, Supreme Lord of Original Sin flicked his long spear. As quick as it was, Maha only felt his vision blur as if a star had smashed into his chest. The explosive impact sent him flying back. Watching this scene, the 9 Supreme Lords didn't say a single word. Then they all soared into the sky, following their godly genius. Are we going to let them go just like that? Supreme Lord of Original Sin indifferently asked as he casually rolled up his spear and held it in his hands. The elder merely looked towards the direction they had left and insisted, let them go. All our chances will be lost once we slay a godly genius. It is not worth it. After the sacred race were all out of sight, Master Feng introduced this person to the Supreme Lords present. Everyone was surprised as it turned out that this elder was the 3rd disciple of the holy being. And his name was Win. Because of the dispute among the holy beings, their disciples were either dead or injured. Win had escaped into the inner world of the holy being, which meant that he had not only managed to escape death, but he had also fallen into a long and deep slumber. Many years ago, Win only woke up once to activate the bloodline of the celestial position. Since the celestial position was set up by the disciples, it began to operate according to their designated path right after its activation at a designated time. Among them, the head was one part of their arrangement. Both the genuine dragon and thoughtless minds were one part of it, while Zen was the most important. It was just that in the beginning, the disciples of the holy being had intended to treat Zen as a secret chess piece, hoping that he would grow in the dark, while Nathan was a distinct chess piece, having all the support of other godly geniuses. However, there were still a lot of flaws in the way they operated. No matter how skilled the disciples were, they could not be counted as perfect. Thus Zen won the first place, and in the end, Xenia had become the hidden chess piece. But the rate at which the plan was being pushed, already made it impossible for Win and the head of the celestial position to consider it further. They had no choice but to send Zen and the others into the divine refinement forbidden land first. Otherwise, no matter how many layouts there were carefully mapped out, it would all be in vain. The uproar caused by the sacred race had caused many Supreme Lords to feel an even greater sense of crisis, especially the thoughtless minds led by the 4 great Supreme Lords. Nathan's clan, Lawson's clan, Lucille's clan, and Janet's clan, they were all descendants of the disciples. If the sacred race occupied the entire universe, they might let other forces live, but first, they would have to eradicate the 4 great clans. Several days had already passed when the godly geniuses left the universe and teleported to the divine refinement forbidden land. According to Master Feng, the divine refinement forbidden land was a notably complicated place. First of all, the world was vast and boundless. It might not belong to the universe, but it was also the inner world of a holy being. Warriors from the divine land, as well as warriors from the inner worlds of holy beings, dwelt in this so-called inner world. Many good and evil people mixed up together, with all sorts of races also residing in it. Besides all these, the divine refinement forbidden land was also an excellent place to gain experience. The 10 godly geniuses simultaneously teleported as if they were in sync. The transmission channel, where they successfully passed through, was no ordinary thing. Normally, the space law was used in a transmission channel to shorten the distance, not to eliminate the distance. However, Zen's transmission at this time only lasted for an instant. He realized he came to a strange world and knew that this place was no longer the universe. Cave. Zen instinctively lifted his head to look at the sky and noted that he was in a huge cave. It could be said to be huge, because Zen could no longer describe the size of the cave. Its dome stretched as far as his naked eye could see, and its height was probably equivalent to the height between the supreme worlds and the stars. This enormous cave was so tremendous that it could no longer be called a cave but a world. There seemed to be countless specks of light at the top of the cave, alternating between dimness and radiance. Moreover, from time to time, it was illuminated with glittering wave of lights. Not only these specks of light brought light to this enormous cave, but they also served as the suns in this cave. Due to the distance being too far, Zen was unable to see what those dots of light were. However, he assumed that they were probably some life forms, stuck at the top of the cave. And as they were able to emit that kind of radiance at such a long distance, these creatures' size might not be small. The tiny dots of light might be as big as a star. Though those dots of light looked mesmerizing when viewed from afar, they were not the destination of Zen's exploration. This time when he entered the divine refinement forbidden land, he mentally motivated himself to raise his cultivation as fast as possible. As a godly genius, Maha was only a step away from becoming a true god. If he could become a true god, then he would have the qualifications to save the universe. And as for who was right or wrong, that didn't matter anymore. The location of Zen's teleportation was extremely desolate. It seemed as if he was standing on a flat desert, with not a single soul roaming around. But strikingly, there were countless divine textures carved into the bottom of the desert. What surprised Zen was that the level of these divine textures was so high that he had never heard of it before. From Zen's perspective, the divine texture techniques the Cyan Dragon had imparted to him were already exceptionally formidable. However, when he randomly eyed the whole area, he figured out that the divine textures recorded by the Cyan Dragon were not even 1% of those divine textures. The divine textures in the divine refinement forbidden land are abnormally developed, Zen concluded. However, he did not dwell on these matters. Instead, he quickly left the desert. Before they set off in this journey to the divine refinement forbidden land, Master Feng had carefully explained in detail the precautions in the divine refinement forbidden land. One reminder was that there were numerous teleportation areas in the divine refinement forbidden land. They could appear at any location, but wherever it was, the first thing they must do was to hide. The divine refinement forbidden land was a cruel world. At the same time, dead people could not be reborn, so if one wanted to train there, the first step was to live and keep alive. It was an advantage on Zen's part that this desert was completely barren, as it took him an hour to pass through the desert with ease. Not long after, he discerned a grey forest coming into his view. And as he got nearer, he realized that it was composed of stones. Zen rapidly approached one of the trees and leapt lightly, and unknowingly, broke a branch as soon as he landed on the solid ground. No matter how carefully he examined them, from the bark to the tree trunk, and then to the leaves, he found they were all stones. It was not rather rare for trees to be turned into stones. For example, fossils were often formed when various creatures wallowed in the river of time. This area of the forest might have encountered some unforeseen situations, turning it into stones. However, when Zen felt the life force flowing through the tree trunk, he was sure that the stone forest was still growing. They were born stones. In the divine refinement forbidden land, anything that goes against common sense can happen. Don't be too surprised. The inner world of every holy being is different. One of Master Feng's warnings echoed in Zen's mind. After Zen cautiously had observed the forest for a while, he laid the broken branch back on the ground and stealthily snuck into the stony forest. What Zen did not know was that a gigantic creature had set its sights on him the moment he had entered the forest. Chapter 1466. Move forward. Complete silence enveloped the whole stone forest. Zen could only hear his own quiet breathing as he entered the forest, his senses on high alert. The place did not belong to the universe, so Zen couldn't use the power transfer skill. In addition, the aboriginals of the Divine Refinement Forbidden Land and the martial artists from the Divine Land were also there. In this forest, all the plants including trees and weeds were all stones. When Zen stepped on the forest ground, the weeds under his feet broke occasionally. Nevertheless, he kept moving. After 4 hours, Zen estimated that he had traveled about 500 miles. If he had traveled by air, he would have covered the same distance in just seconds. However, it would be dangerous to expose himself in the air when he was unfamiliar with the place. The sky got darker, and Zen saw that the starlight which hung from the cave's dome-like ceiling began to dim. Clearly, night and day also existed in the Divine Refinement Forbidden Land. However, the night had come too quickly. Within the time of a few seconds, the bright day had completely been replaced by darkness. There was no transitional process at all. This darkness was unable to affect Zen's perception. A green light flashed in his eyes, and the blurry world of darkness gradually became clear again. Keep moving. At that moment, Zen wanted nothing more than to meet a martial arts practitioner to gain more knowledge and information about the world he was in. Just at the moment the darkness fell, Zen felt the earth suddenly tremble. Boom, boom, boom. Huge feet stomped heavily on the ground and formed many craters. Not far from Zen was a mountain, which moved rather slowly. It turned out to be a huge monster's body that was about over 10,000 feet tall, but its head was surprisingly small. After the gigantic being had walked for a while, it stopped and stretched out its tiny head towards the stone forest. It opened its mouth and began to chew on the branches and leaves. But those are stones, it even eats stones. Zen thought. He was only about 50 feet away from the creature, and he was shocked to see it eat stones. What he didn't know was that the stones contained life energy. Zen saw the stones as nothing different from the hard and brittle common stones, but they were natural food for the creatures in the Divine Refinement Forbidden Land. Perhaps such a creature's intelligence did not evolve in its evolutionary process. It had an enormous body, but not a predatory behavior. In fact, it had a rather mild nature. Then again, in the world of nature, mild creatures were destined to become food for others. A high-pitched scream that came from the darkness suddenly disturbed the quietness. The entire forest became lively, followed by strange voices. Zen didn't understand anything at all, but he was certain that the creatures in the darkness were intelligent. While the mountain-like beast was simple-minded, it wasn't stupid. Its huge body turned around once it heard the noise. Its huge build enabled it to cross a wide span in one step. It wasn't slow either when it ran at full speed, but as it slowly adjusted its direction, the shadows in the stone forest got closer and closer. At the same time, they frantically jumped towards the mountain-like beast's body. Meanwhile, Zen had completely hidden his aura in the darkness. However, he could also clearly see what the shadows were. They looked like monkeys that were less than half a meter tall. These monkeys were slightly different from the monkeys Zen had seen before. At the very least, their mouths didn't stick out and they didn't have a chin like an ape's. Many of them simply leapt and passed Zen. They had a clear division of labor between them. The strong ones attempted to chase away the huge beast, while the fast ones climbed onto its huge body and moved towards its neck. It wasn't long before Zen heard the huge beast howl, before it finally fell to the side with an earth-shattering thud. To the shorter creatures, such a gigantic beast seemed like a huge mountain of meat. The said creatures then dug open the beast's thick skin and began to divide the fat beneath it in an orderly fashion. On the other hand, Zen watched hidden for a while before preparing to leave. The creatures were all aboriginals from the Divine Refinement Forbidden Land and spoke a different language from Zen, so it would be hard to communicate with them. In any case, Zen aimed to find humanoid creatures like the demon knight, ogres, or even giants. Overall, this Divine Refinement Forbidden Land was not as dangerous as he had imagined. Soon enough, he disappeared into the stone forest in a flash. He planned to advance and continue to explore. Just as Zen had gone deeper into the stone forest, he heard a faint sound. Although the sound was gentle, the thing moved extremely fast. The sound had caught Zen's attention at once. His body moved once more, then he agilely traversed through the forest. He chose a tree trunk, then suddenly stopped on top of it. Swoosh, swoosh, he heard two extremely soft sounds once again. Zen's eyebrows twitched and his long sword slightly trembled. A beam of sword light slashed out and formed an arc, which spread out quickly. At that moment, the stones within a 30-mile radius around Zen shattered. Whoosh whoosh whoosh, the things that had followed Zen no longer had any place to hide. Thus, they spread their wings and flew into the sky. Huge bats. Zen was stunned. The creatures had jet black bodies and a pair of obsidian fleshy wings. They were like spies who moved secretly in the night. When their wings were fully spread, they could stretch as long as about 70 or 80 feet. Apart from the monkey-like creatures that Zen had seen before, it seemed that the creatures that lurked within the stone forest were especially large in build. Could this be the world outside the fairy palace? There were creatures of enormous builds that lived in the huge forest outside the fairy palace. However, the trees in the world outside the fairy palace were unimaginably tall, so Zen quickly dismissed such a possibility. If Zen's speculations were correct, the world outside the fairy palace was located somewhere in the divine land, and this place wasn't the divine land. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. The bats flew across the sky, but Zen only saw black shadows suddenly flash and then disappear from his sight. Then, they moved around him quite swiftly. Although they flew extremely fast, they couldn't escape the range of Zen's watch. He gripped the long sword even tighter. If the giant bats dared to attack him, he would kill them immediately. However, the giant bats seemed to be quite intelligent. They looked like they dreaded Zen's long sword and didn't dare come closer. Zen didn't bother to deal with them anymore after a long standoff. Instead, he sped up in the darkness and continued to move forward. As he moved forward, the giant bats continued to trail closely behind him. They didn't get too close to him nor retreated. Instead, the bats kept a safe distance from him. I wonder why they keep following me, Zen thought. Suddenly, he felt very strange. After Zen had advanced about 400 miles, he finally reached the end of the stone forest. The bats stopped as well. They still wanted to follow Zen, but they seemed afraid of something ahead and kept hovering above Zen's head. What kind of powerful existence is there ahead of us? Zen wondered. The concept of fierce beasts came from the universe. Therefore, Zen knew that the creatures in the divine refinement forbidden land couldn't just be classified under fierce beasts. These creatures were also extremely territorial and refused to move forward. The land ahead of them must belong to other creatures. Zen didn't hesitate too much before he continued to advance alone. Overall, the creatures he had encountered in the divine refinement forbidden land weren't that powerful, or at least, there was nothing that could threaten Zen's life at the moment. But as soon as Zen thought of it, he quickly dismissed the idea. After he had passed through the stone forest, the next forest ahead seemed to be a normal one. It still looked lush and verdant despite its strange trees and flowers. It looked a lot better than the stone forest. The moment Zen stepped into the forest, he heard the clatter of a horse's hooves. Along the forest path galloped a small, handsome white horse with a sharp horn on its head. A unicorn. Zen froze. He no longer looked as calm as before, because the horse carried a woman on its back, and her cultivation level was at the peak of the spirit transformation realm. Aside from the woman, warriors with high cultivation levels and even some world lords followed behind her. Chapter 1467. The Teleporting Area. The unicorn's glorious white mane was so soft and so light that the slightest move by the unicorn made it roll like ocean waves on the beach. If one were to carefully examine the creature up close, one would see perfect divine textures embedded in its hooves. Every time the unicorn took a step forward, these divine textures created an extremely tiny force field. Inside this force field, the unicorn would propel itself forward. It would cut through the air in front of it, all the while protected by the barrier. Princess Royal, we've already made it to the edge of the Grey Forest. Here, the darkness lasts for 132 hours. I'm afraid that if we walk any farther, we'll be in grave danger, one of the black-robed men warned. In the eyes of an ordinary person, the complete darkness had already descended. They would not be able to see anything at all. However, for Zen and the warriors in front of him, this degree of darkness was nothing. Unless the dark law shrouded the area, Zen and the warriors would have no problem seeing here. Because there were world lords in the group, Zen went to great lengths to remain hidden. He very carefully curled up to one side. From there, he clearly heard the ongoing conversation. It was one from which he learned a lot. Princess Royal, did these people come from the divine refinement forbidden land or the divine land? This woman was clearly of very high status. Will it last 132 hours? Zen thought for a moment. If this were the case, then the items on top of the cave would need 132 hours before they could light up again. What dangers would await them here during these 132 hours? Don't be so anxious. Those yellow birds had been dispersed once before. This time, there won't be that many left, the woman coldly replied as she spurred the unicorn toward the Grey Forest. Even so, the teleporting area on the Glitter Gold Gobi has been abandoned for thousands of years. The legend that has reached you was a joke. We cannot expect the same fate. We cannot expect the same fate. When Zen heard this, he was momentarily stunned. Ever since he embarked on the path to becoming a renowned martial artist, he had witnessed various debates about fate. Zen had once wondered that if everything that had happened and would happen to him had been decided by the heavens. However, not long ago, Rocher had told him that all of these theories about fate were simply lies. Zen couldn't help but think back to what Rocher had said. What he heard from this conversation supported Rocher's idea. "Kenan, how dare you eavesdrop on me?" the woman said, with a hint of contempt. "We must do this to protect you, Your Highness. If you are dissatisfied, we can dutifully let His Highness know," the black-robed warrior replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "We have already captured the man from the celestial soul race, the one who sold flowers. The story he told was a ploy to lure Your Highness into the Grey Forest. From what I know, the area is home to a few extremely powerful monsters that are interested in Your Highness. By that, I mean, they're interested in Your Highness, flesh and blood." The woman, visibly infuriated by the guard's words, grew speechless. Nevertheless, she continued to urge her unicorn forward. "Your Highness, you're only 200 feet away from the Grey Forest." Kenan's voice suddenly grew louder. Zen detected a sense of urgency in it. Princess Royal didn't respond. She merely rode her unicorn closer and closer to the Grey Forest. "Your Highness, you're now only 100 feet from the Grey Forest," Kenan warned again. Right then and there, a flash of pure craftiness appeared on Princess Royal's face. Without another word, she pulled back her unicorn's rein. Immediately, it shot forward, toward the Grey Forest, just like an arrow that had just left its bow. "Stop, it's too dangerous." Kenan's expression changed drastically. Without missing a beat, he stretched out his hands. In the process, they transformed into two gigantic hands that instantly appeared behind Princess Royal. Almost immediately, she and her unicorn found themselves in between Kenan's hands. Kenan was clearly intent on stopping them. However, this unicorn was extremely fast. Even though Kenan thought he had blocked Princess Royal's movement, she and her unicorn had in fact moved half of their bodies into the Grey Forest. As Zen quietly lurked within the forest, he took note of the expression on Kenan's face. Kenan had the cultivation of a world lord. He succeeded in stopping Princess Royal right now. Why did he look so troubled now? Zen could clearly see Kenan's ashen face in the darkness. Instantly, Zen understood. Just now, he had traversed through the entire stone forest. It appeared to be completely desolate. It took him a while before he spotted life, a group of monkeys hunting for food. The worst that he experienced was getting attacked for a while by those bats. Overall, there were not too many traps in the forest. In ordinary circumstances, it would not be deemed dangerous. But the moment the woman walked into the Grey Forest, something changed. Zen could feel the ground beneath his feet trembling non-stop, as if there was an endless earthquake. Rumble, rumble, the Grey Forest trembled as if it had awoken. Trees, branches swayed and swatted in the darkness, looking eerily like the devil's fangs and claws. This was supposed to be nothing. Ordinary martial artists would not panic in the face of these phenomena. No matter how powerful the earthquake was, it would not be strong enough to kill martial artists who could fly. But there was a boundless and terrifying aura coming from underground. The moment that this powerful aura was released, Zen seemed to lose control of himself momentarily. His teeth chattered. Thankfully, he had the presence of mind to try to regain control of his movements. Zen's instinctual human fear had caused his physical body to lose control when he detected that aura. Fortunately, he only lost control for a moment. If it had been just a little longer, he would have been compelled to flee for his life. Right now was not the right time for Zen to expose himself. What exactly was hiding underground? Even when he faced an enraged Supreme Lord, Zen hadn't felt this kind of fear. Just then, Princess Royal, who was sitting on her unicorn, turned pale. "Run, hurry up, otherwise, we'll all die here." Kenan, speechless, had the same look of terror on his face. Kenan, a warrior with abilities of a world lord, had lost his composure. One could only imagine what horrors lay hidden under the earth in the Grey Forest. How come nothing happened when I walked through the forest? Zen couldn't help but wonder. Could it be that Kenan was right? That these underground objects are only interested in Princess Royal's blood? With an urgent tug, Kenan pulled Princess Royal and her unicorn out of the Grey Forest. "Let's go, but this time, the darkness will last for so long. I'm afraid there's going to be big trouble," someone shouted. Zen was remaining hidden, but one hard look into the forest made him reveal himself. When he saw what was lurking there, he immediately made a run for it. Zen gave it his all. He dashed toward the group at an extremely fast speed. From the floor of the Grey Forest, a huge, black shadow stretched up toward the sky. No one could tell how long that giant shadow was, but its width easily spanned thousands of feet. From the looks of it, it was probably the same size as the genuine dragon and the genuine phoenix. The top of its massive body was covered with huge barbs and hooks, all of which grew in reverse toward the huge black hole at the top. At the edges of the black hole, there were many distinct black and white spheres. Although Zen didn't understand what this monster was, he could instantly tell that those numerous spheres were the monster's eyeballs. All living creatures were extremely sensitive to that part of the body, and Zen was no exception. Seeing such a thing, Zen had no time to be afraid to expose himself. Princess Royal, who was on the back of a unicorn, rode fast. She was the first to reach the very front. The others, lined up in a row, followed behind her. None of them chose to fly. These people knew this divine refinement forbidden land very well. Otherwise, Zen would not have chosen to follow them. Using his agile move technique, he tailed this group of martial artists. Because of his speed, Zen naturally had no way of hiding his presence. So even though the Princess Royal was still in a panic over seeing the huge shadow in the forest, she discovered Zen. "Kennen, I found him. I told you. I said he'll definitely show up," Princess Royal cried out. As the group sprinted away from the forest, they saw Zen jump up and join their fleeing team. They were all baffled, especially Kennen. His shocked gaze was fixed on Zen. "This is impossible. The teleporting area in the glitter gold gobi has been destroyed. How could someone appear here?" However, due to the problem they were currently facing, Kennen had no time to deal with this. The gigantic shadow had begun following them, extending its body through the forest floors. It was chasing after them at an extremely fast speed. Chapter 1468, Confidence. From a distance, it eerily looked like an earthworm crawling around. Despite its considerable size, the monster was quite agile in its speed. Zen had overheard the conversation of the two. From their conversation he realized that the Princess Royal at the instigation of somebody else had taken the unicorn to search for him. Although Kennen was certain that this was an impossible task, the Princess Royal managed to get into the Grey Forest. However, even the Princess Royal hadn't expected that the consequences would be so serious. She attracted the terrible monster merely by just stepping into the Grey Forest. What was it about her that intrigued the monster? Was the attraction of her flesh and blood really so strong? Despite this, she did not appear scared. On the contrary, she felt the rush of adrenaline pumping through her blood. Suddenly, she turned herself around on the back of the unicorn, which continued to charge forward rapidly, and fixed her pair of round bright eyes on Zen. "He is at the Spirit Supreme Realm. He must have just arrived in the Divine Refinement Forbidden Land and left the Grey Forest not long ago," the Princess Royal concluded quietly. "Forgive me, Your Highness, but this is not the time to discuss this," Kennen said with an urgency in his voice. Although he sensed Zen's presence in the forest, Kennen did not consider him a threat. Right now he was focusing on ways to block the monster, charging at them from behind. And he had to think fast, or else they all would be crushed soon. "No," the princess said as she continued to stare at Zen, her small mouth curving upwards. "Capture him for me right now. And I want him alive." Zen was stunned when he heard this. Among this group, Kennen and another person were world lords, while the rest of them were at the spirit transformation realm. Zen could easily manage the martial artists at the spirit transformation realm, as long as he avoided these two world lords. These two world lords would not only have to capture Zen, but also deal with the huge shadow that was chasing them from behind. Zen doubted that the world lords would really carry out the princess's command, and if they did, they would land up in a big mess. As expected, Kennen said impatiently, "Your Highness, right now we need to get away from here. We don't have the time to capture him. Our top priority is to run. You should be ashamed to call yourself a world lord, if you can't even catch a spirit supreme realm warrior," the Princess Royal said defiantly. Kennen silently cursed that the princess had chosen this time for an unnecessary argument. If he was given enough time and space, he would be able to easily capture Zen, who was at the spirit supreme realm, no matter how fast he ran. However, there were other priorities right now. And at the top was to protect the princess. No doubt that it was the formless sky python that was chasing them now. It was said that its huge mouth had the capacity to swallow an entire world. In its stomach there contained a long and narrow melting cave, and anyone who entered that cave would be melted and dismembered slowly and tortuously. "Princess, now is not the right time to capture him. Furthermore, this young man might be here for the first time, so he won't be aware about the imminent danger following us. He must also escape with us," Kennen explained to the princess. Then turning towards the forest, he shouted, "Hey you! You won't run away, will you? You have just reached the Divine Refinement Forbidden Land, And with our help, you will be able to achieve twice the results with half the effort. Kenan tried to reason with him. He was only too aware of the princess's fiery temper. She had fought bravely all along and finally reached here. She definitely would not let the guy go. Zen appeared to be strong with his agile figure and speed. Even as a world lord, Kenan might not be able to control him in a short time. Hence, he first had to pacify Zen and then control him. I know that you won't run away. The princess then pondered over the situation for a while and thought since Zen was cornered, she just needed to follow him all the way. There was no need to capture him after all. Zen stood still for a moment and then at a lightning speed, jumped over to the other side. His body flipped twice in the air forming an arc, before disappearing into the trees. These people did not dare to fly high, so Zen naturally would not fly. By now, Zen had known that the formless sky python was chasing after the princess. Obviously, he wouldn't follow them and get himself killed. Moreover, this woman's intentions seemed crazy with her wanting to capture him. If he was to listen to her, then he would definitely land himself in trouble. The princess had just finished speaking when Zen vanished into the trees. She was really furious. How dared he disobey her? Giddy up. Gathering the reins on her unicorn, she made a sharp turn and headed into the forest. Kenan and the other warriors were shocked to see the turn of events unfolding before them so quickly. They just could not believe that the princess would just chase after that man. Their princess's life was more important than that fellow's. Her ever-changing personality and mood swings always kept them distressed all the time. Your Highness, please stop. Don't chase after him. The formless sky python is catching up fast behind you. At present, it was Zen who was currently fuming the most. Earlier, before his strange encounter, he was able to move quickly and peacefully. He never imagined that he would run into such a mysterious woman. Seeing the princess change her direction, the formless sky python also followed suit. So indirectly the creature was pursuing Zen too. If one were to look down from the sky, they would see an enormous chasm forming in the boundless forest. Everywhere the formless sky python passed, it created a complete mess. However, this sort of thing was very common in the Divine Refinement Forbidden Land. The Divine Refinement Forbidden Land was deliberately created by the holy beings. When one cultivated there, they could surely make great progress, and there were also martial artists who could condense the godly tiles. At the same time, the Divine Refinement Forbidden Land was equally dangerous. It was too dangerous to roam around, especially at night. The aboriginals of the Divine Refinement Forbidden Land were protected by a dome known as the Divine Light. As long as the light shone, evil spirits could not enter this world. However, once the divine light faded, they would be vulnerable and defenseless. At such situation, no ordinary warriors would dare to step out, apart from the world lords. Since the Princess Royal was always protected by her circle of warriors, she insisted on heading to the Grey Forest. She wanted to see if anyone descended there. And that was when Zen first appeared at the Glitter Gold Gobi. Since this was an abandoned teleporting area, Zen was all alone. That was when the princess decided to bring Zen back. The unicorn's speed was exceptionally fast. Every time it took a step, a faint light would flash under its hooves. It was closely behind Zen's heels. Hey, wait for me, why are you running away? The princess called out loudly from behind. The warriors chasing behind the princess were in a state of confusion. On one side there was this beast chasing down their throat, but all the princess cared about was to capture that fellow. They certainly felt she was losing her head. Zen did not bother to even think while he surged forward. He could not even make out the path while running. He just kept ramming into bushes and trees, slashing them apart. Nothing would stop him from escaping from that crazy woman. Hearing the princess shout so loudly, Zen really wanted to murder her. However, the thought of the two world lords following behind this woman made Zen run even harder. It would be better for him to think of other ways to get rid of them. Kenan, stop that fellow or else be prepared to face your consequences. When she realized that the distance between Zen and her was increasing, she decided to use her trump card. She knew Kenan wouldn't back out, but would obey her order. When Zen heard those words, he immediately pulled out his Thunderwind Divine Sword. Already the formless sky python was very close behind the princess. Despite this, if the world lord dared to capture him, Zen would kill the princess first. Huff, huff, while continuing to run, Zen decided to spread out his killing intent. Although this killing intent was subtle, Kenan clearly felt it. The killing intent, which was purposefully spread out, carried a clear hint of warning. Kenan didn't plan on carrying out the princess's order. After all, it wasn't the first time he disobeyed her. However, the killing intent that Zen suddenly released surprised Kenan. The killing intent clearly sent a message to Kenan that if he were to make a move, Zen would definitely kill the princess. Zen clearly knew that there were 2 world lords among those warriors and that the princess herself was a top-level spirit transformation realm martial artist. However, he still dared to release such a killing intent with a hint of warning. He was so confident about his own strength. Kenan instantly came to a conclusion. Chapter 1469, Keep the Princess Hostage. Kenan's attitude was firm. His only goal was the protection of the princess. However, Zen had made it known that he would kill the princess just to rattle him. If this was just any normal situation, Kenan would have already killed him. It was obvious he wasn't from here. From the looks of it, he might have come from someplace inferior to the divine land. Nonetheless, Kenan considered him as nothing important. He wanted to end this. But Kenan was smart, too. He didn't dare to act recklessly while the formless sky python was on his tail. Zen, too, remained calm. The higher the profit one desired, the higher the risk one had to face. This was the basic principle. Although the divine refinement Forbidden Land was a completely independent world, it had potential to bring great benefits to martial artists. For some, they could condense their godly tiles here and become true gods. However, the risk involved would be unimaginable. Zen knew he could die if he wasn't careful. He would be either swallowed up by the beast, or get killed by the 2 world lords. These 2 were powerful, and they never held back. That day in the great world, it had been hard for even a handful of godly geniuses to fight against the Grand Sorcerer. Now that Zen had to face the 2 world lords, he didn't stand a chance. Kenan, how dare you disobey me? The princess was furious as ever. In her eyes, as long as Kenan made the right move, the guy before her could never escape. Rolling his eyes, Kenan held a divine texture in his hand. The formless sky python behind them was getting closer and closer. He was planning to use the sky defensive divine texture to block it. But before he could do anything, the princess had already lost all patience. I'll get him myself. She possessed a cultivation at the peak of the spirit transformation realm, and she could be considered almost a world lord. Facing Zen, who was at the spirit supreme realm, she knew what she had to do to take him down. Whoosh! With an oiled paper umbrella suddenly in her hands, she leapt into the air. This was her secret weapon. Historically, umbrella weapons were relatively rare, and the one in the princess's hand had in particular possessed ultimate powers. The princess leapt up agilely and landed gracefully and firmly on the back of the unicorn, then she shook the umbrella with all her might. Bam! The umbrella spread open. Sky soul cover. The moment the umbrella opened, an umbrella-shaped ray of light emerged above Zen's head, coming down at him. A sharp beam flashed in Zen's eyes as his desire to kill was raging. The woman was coming after him, but he knew he couldn't make a scene. If she came here looking for death, then she couldn't blame him for killing her. Before the sky soul cover reached him, Zen balled up in the air and a sharp sword radiance slashed straight at the sky soul cover. God's intimidating strike. Wind kill. After Zen had completely comprehended the god's intimidating strike, his comprehension of swordsmanship had reached a whole new level. The chaotic god's intimidating strike he summoned was based on the metal law, that had combined the burst of the chaotic energy. However, he knew that the laws of this world weren't limited to metal law. Zen had tried to fuse a variety of laws into the strike, trying to activate a much stronger power of chaotic energy. However, he failed. The chaotic energy clashed with the other laws. He was unable to fuse 2 or more types of laws with the chaotic energy. The result of his attempt was that the chaotic energy had directly devoured the mixed 2 types of law power. Zen had no idea why it would go like this. But despite the failure, Zen discovered that when the god's intimidating strike was fused with other types of laws, the effects were different according to laws that had been infused. For example, when fused with the wind law, it could spread the sword radiance endlessly. Moreover, both the speed of the strike and the angle at which the strike hit its target became unpredictable. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. The sky soul cover was instantly destroyed by Zen's sword. The princess was left stunned. How could that have been too easy? She looked at her umbrella in dismay. It was from her father, and its attack was obliterated too quickly. Her weapon, the solitary star umbrella, was a supreme primordial weapon. With the princess's cultivation level, she never missed her targets when she released the sky soul cover, all except for world lords. She was still surprised by what just happened. Seeing the princess take the move, Kenan didn't stop her. Perhaps the young man in front of her had some ability, but he was still a lot weaker than her in terms of cultivation. Not to mention, the princess had a supreme primordial weapon. As he moved to form the sky defensive divine texture to block the formless sky python, he knew that stopping the formless sky python was their only chance to escape. Now that it had been chasing them, it would definitely wreak havoc on the land. If they didn't shake it off, some cities would definitely suffer. But before he could finish the sky defensive divine texture, the man in front of them severed the princess's sky soul cover with a single sword strike. His speed is amazing, dang. He had only finished half of the sky defensive divine texture, but without any hesitation, he stopped the work he was doing. It was noticeable that a sky defensive divine texture would consume much of his energy. It was a waste of his energy and it wasn't easy for him to give up. But he knew which was more important, so he stopped and switched his attention. Since he had seen this young man's terrifying sword strike, he knew that if he did not act now, the Princess Royal would most likely die. Pa! Kenan suddenly clapped his hands together, and a divine texture appeared and spread. An identical divine texture appeared in front of the princess, forming a black vortex. PFF'd. At the same time, Zen's second sword strike arrived and crashed into the black vortex. Hence, Kenan had successfully broken Zen's second strike using his divine texture. The princess was startled after realizing what had happened. Anger and frustration pierced through her eyes. She couldn't believe that this guy actually wanted to kill her. Kenan's expression darkened. If it was not for his quick thinking, the princess would have been dead by now. Woodrow, take that kid down. I will continue to form the array. Previously, Kenan hadn't intended to kill Zen. He'd only treated him as someone insignificant. The divine refinement forbidden land was very cruel, and some races would kill any living thing they saw. But Kenan's group came from the divine land, so they had a superior mindset. They did not have any interest in killing weaker beings. But because this man put the princess at risk, it was a capital offense that couldn't be looked over. The middle-aged man named Woodrow also chose to take action after hearing Kenan's orders. With his cultivation of a world lord, it wouldn't be difficult for him to take down Zen. At this moment, Zen's body somersaulted in the air and changed directions once again. He was charging towards the princess. Zen was very clear about the current situation. Whether it was that enormous formless sky python behind him, or the group of powerful masters, Zen was no match for them. He knew he just had to take advantage of others to save himself. Although the divine refinement forbidden land was extremely dangerous, he was completely baffled why he would get into such trouble. The princess didn't expect Zen to turn and come at her. She was still standing on the back of the unicorn and galloped forward at an incredible speed. As both of them sped, she could only see a figure flash before her eyes. Her next thought was to open the solitary star umbrella, which could protect her. Unfortunately, she didn't think fast enough. Bam! With a wave of his hand, Zen grabbed the Princess Royal. Because of the great force binding her, even with her cultivation at the peak of the spirit transformation realm, she could not break free from his grasp. The princess was at a complete loss of what to do. Garbage! Kenan's and Woodrow's expressions suddenly shifted. This young man was actually grasping the Princess Royal as he rushed towards the formless sky python. So the moment Zen made his move, he had thought out every possible outcome. First of all, he could not kill the princess on the unicorn. Regardless how difficult it was to kill a warrior at the peak of the spirit transformation realm, even if he could kill her, the two world lords would never let him go if the princess died at his hands. There was no way he could escape the divine refinement forbidden land, so killing the princess would be a death sentence. Little did everyone know, his two strikes were done only to test their reactions. The results were just as Zen had assumed. When he struck out his second sword strike to threaten the princess, they already decided to take him out. One of the world lords was prepared to make a move against him. At that point, the smart move was to keep the princess hostage. Chapter 1470, The Wishing Spell. Zen knew he couldn't kill this woman, but it was impossible for her to understand what was going on in his mind. The riskiest part of his plan was this woman's strength. But Zen had understood the situation and gotten an estimate of this woman's actual strength from his last two strikes. Just as he had speculated, this woman was just like Margaret. Despite their great talent and powerful strength, they had little experience in actual combat. This type of warrior never could fully exert their strength in line with their cultivation bases. However, Zen didn't know that his guess was only half right. His thinking was still limited by his experience from the original universe. He didn't realize that everything in the divine land was far beyond his imagination. This woman was not as simple as he thought she was. As Zen brought the woman to fly in reverse, Kenan and Woodrow, the two world lords, were scared out of their wits. The spirit transformation realm warriors were also dumbfounded. What should we do? Woodrow activated his life vitality and was about to chase after Zen before he realized he had to ask Kennen. He didn't know what he could do to help the princess. Zen was not only holding the princess hostage but was also taking her towards the formless sky python. This was a desperate situation. We have no other choice now. We can only fight it head-on, Kennen said as he crossed his hands and pressed his index fingers to his temples. What? Woodrow said, shocked at Kennen's actions. Kennen was decisive in his actions. He had never hesitated throughout the entire journey. No matter how much trouble the princess had caused, he always made the right decisions. Just like the way he had given up the idea of blocking the monster to stop Zen's attack when he noticed Zen's killing intent. And now, he had decided to save the princess at all costs. Although the princess didn't treasure her own life, her safety was always their top priority. Dear gods, please listen to my dearest wish. May the immortal gods show your grace and create a barrier to seal this evil beast. A strong aura enveloped Kennen's body the moment he made this wish. Zen was finding it difficult to steady himself in the air under the impact of this aura. At the same time, he was shocked to find out that this world lord's aura had suddenly become as strong as that of a supreme lord. What had happened when Kennen had recited those words? Why was he able to improve so much in the blink of an eye? Once Kennen had made his wish, countless blue crystals started to materialize and accumulate in the air in front of him, quickly forming a huge enchanted barrier. The giant formless sky python was less than 1,000 feet away from them. It could cover the distance in the blink of an eye. The enchanted barrier spread around and successfully sealed the formless sky python within it. Zen was surprised when the formless sky python stopped moving. This beast could fight a supreme lord, but a world lord was able to seal it. How was this possible? It was at this moment that the way Zen saw cultivation bases changed greatly. His old knowledge of cultivation bases was from the original universe. He didn't know how it was in other universes, nor did he know about the divine land. In the universe where he was born, every supreme lord carried a specific heavenly destiny. But there was no supreme lords in the divine land. Above the world lords were the true gods. Though the world lords of the divine land couldn't carry heavenly destinies, they could cultivate a special skill called the wishing spell. They weren't the only ones who had grasped this skill. The wishing spell was powerful, but it also required a large price to be paid for it. It represented the strong obsession of a warrior. For example, if a man wanted to take revenge and kill the emperor of his country, he could use the wishing spell and swear to heaven that he would kill the emperor one day. He would gain additional power once the spell was cast successfully. His cultivation base and thinking ability would be greatly enhanced. Unfortunately, if the emperor suddenly died for other reasons before the warrior could carry out his plan of revenge, his wishing spell would remain unfulfilled. It would become an inner demon that would appear at his most vulnerable moment to land him a fatal blow. In the divine land, many people had been able to learn the wishing spell. After all, it was regarded as one of the many traditional skills in the divine land. But very few people were willing to use this skill because it had the potential for ruining their future. The moment Kennen had used this skill, he was filled with regret. This place was near the Grey Forest and was a relatively safe zone. As long as they did not go across the glitter gold Gobi and into the desert, they wouldn't be in any great danger. Still, the powerful creatures in the forest were not to be trifled with. The princess was now in a life and death situation because of her own willfulness, and Kennen had no other choice but to use the wishing spell. Since he had made the wish, he would have to kill the formless sky python first if he wanted to improve his cultivation. Zen was curious about this world lord's method, but he didn't stop to find out more and sprinted forward to escape. Stop him, Woodrow, Kennen exclaimed angrily. He had used the wishing spell to prevent the formless sky python from hurting the princess. But since he needed to keep at the spell, he was not in a position to chase after Zen. When the formless sky python, which was sealed inside the enchanted barrier, sensed that the princess was leaving, its huge body trembled, wanting to catch her. A cracking sound ripped through from the enchanted barrier. The barrier looked like it would break even though it was created using the great power of the wishing spell. At the sound, Woodrow knew that Kennen wouldn't be able to hold on for long. So he led the group of spirit transformation realm warriors to chase after Zen. Let me go, the princess spoke suddenly. Zen had carried her all the way back. They were now only 300 feet away from the formless sky python. At such a close distance, they could clearly see a frightening pile of eyeballs growing on the giant monster's head. The princess was so terrified that even if Zen hadn't held her tightly, she wouldn't have dared move an inch. But now, Kennen was controlling the formless sky python, which was why she wasn't so afraid anymore and started berating Zen loudly. But Zen only responded with a snort. There was no turning back for him, now that he held the princess hostage and escaped. Luckily, since the formless sky python had distracted a world lord, he knew that he had made the right choice. The question was, how long would the world lord be able to control the beast? It had astonished Zen that Kennen was able to seal the beast all by himself. Even some low-ranked supreme lords did not have this ability. But Zen dared not lower his guard because there was another world lord chasing after him. Zen's mind continued to analyze the situation as he continued on his path to escape, the princess in his arms. "You brat, let the princess go, and I will spare your life. Or you will regret for what you have done." Woodrow's voice boomed threateningly as he chased after them. "Let the princess go. Do you know who we are? We won't kill you if you don't hurt the princess." The spirit transformation realm guards began to shout, threatening Zen and trying to placate him at the same time. What they didn't know was that their threats were only making Zen even more determined to keep running. Zen knew that the animosity between him and this group of warriors had already reached peak level. He had no choice but to take the princess hostage. Luckily, her body was slim enough that it didn't burden him. "You want to be stubborn? Don't blame me for not warning you." Woodrow shouted, and with a flip of his hand, a number of silver spikes appeared behind him. Soul-chasing spike. The spikes flashed a cyan light as they spiraled and whizzed through the air and shot towards Zen's back. Zen threw the princess behind him and used her body as a shield against the spikes. Woodrow's face darkened. He didn't dare hurt the princess with the soul-chasing spikes. So with an angry wave of his hand, he caused all the spikes to explode. Chapter 1471, God-Burning Flame. In the past, Zen would have never taken advantage of a woman to use her as a shield. However, this place was not the universe that he came from. The rules of the game were very different here. Right from the beginning, when Zen started training to become a warrior, he had never lacked strong supporters. He also knew that these mighty warriors backed him only due to the so-called destiny. These powerful masters would regularly motivate him to progress further and move forward all the time. But here in the Divine Refinement Forbidden Land, Zen had to rely solely on himself. Moreover, the Princess Royal who he had captured was provoking him. If it had not been for this pestering woman, he would not have encountered a bizarre event right after he arrived in the Divine Refinement Forbidden Land. "You won't be able to escape." A world lord called Woodrow hung behind Zen, the cyan light constantly flashing in his hand, which indicated that he intended to use another Thurgy. "If you get any closer to me, I promise you that I will cut off her head," warned Zen finally. Since these people were so concerned about this woman, they would certainly care about her life. However, his words failed to have the desired effect. Using a hostage to threaten the powerful warriors was not a very good negotiating tactic. Many formidable warriors felt that a hostage could only be exchanged for a small amount of conditions, but it was impossible to threaten them with no limits. And even if Woodrow agreed to Zen's request, the Princess Royal could still be killed in the end. It was a gamble he was unwilling to play. Therefore, Woodrow acted as if he hadn't heard anything. The cyan light in his hands became brighter and brighter. He was preparing for an extremely vicious soul attack, the Soul Shock. Once this move was executed, all living beings within a radius of several dozen miles would temporarily turn into zombies, as their souls became stagnant. Zen's eyebrows furrowed when he saw that his threat was useless. The opponent could read his mind. He was only trying to escape, and did not have the heart to harm the woman he was holding captive. If it continued this way, Zen would be in dire straits. Suddenly a strange call came from behind him. The cry seemed to have come from underground. Rumble. The shocked Woodrow saw that the formless sky python was twisting and turning. At the same time, a huge crack appeared on the ground behind the formless sky python, after which the ground tore open, as if something huge was breaking out from beneath. Bam! The ground exploded, and another formless sky python drilled its way out from it. Two formless sky pythons. No, it is the same one. Bloody heck, that is the tail of the formless sky python. This monstrosity has two heads. The enormous python was thousands of miles long, and no one saw its tail. After the formless sky python's head was sealed by the World Lord's wishing spell, another head emerged from the ground and crashed into the blue space. Boom! With just one hit, countless cracks appeared in the space. Puff! In the distance, Kennen suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood, and his face turned pale. Alarmed, he cried out, "Woodrow! Employ the wishing spell right now to suppress this beast." Seeing this horrifying turn of events, Woodrow had to leave Zen behind. The Princess Royal was still in Zen's firm grasp. He had only wanted to use this chance to run for his life, and he thought that this might be the time to escape. But if the formless sky python managed to break free from the wishing spell, then everyone would be obliterated. Follow him, Woodrow ordered the other martial artists, as his figure floated up. His hands intertwined and he pointed his index fingers at his own forehead. I have invoked the wishing spell, which will descend upon us with the divine soul. I hope that the souls of all living things will reincarnate, and that the world will never cease. I hope the world will be peaceful all the time and all the evil souls in this world will be vanquished. Crash! An enormous soul pressure descended suddenly. This soul was probably 100 times stronger than Woodrow's own soul. This mighty soul conquered the soul of the formless sky python. The other head of the formless sky python, which was desperately snapping at the seal set up by Kenan, was writhing frantically. The cracks on the blue space were also increasing, but just as Woodrow's wishing spell was about to terminate it, the formless sky python suddenly slowed down its movements. It seemed to be disoriented and weak. What on earth is this wishing spell? It's so powerful. Zen was intrigued and shocked at the same time. It was obvious that Woodrow was a world lord, but his method of casting the wishing spell was even more powerful than that of any supreme lords who Zen had encountered. He was still in shock, but he continued to rush forward madly. The group of spirit transformation realm martial artists behind him also chased after Zen closely without showing any signs of stopping. They didn't have as much responsibility as the other two world lords, so they didn't dare to attack Zen. They only pursued him, constantly warning him to let go of the Princess Royal. Zen was surely going to ignore these people. He would never let go of his hostage until he was sure that he was safe. Suddenly he felt something move in his hand. He was startled with the sight before him and he quickly flung the woman in his arm away. Whop! Zen used all his strength, throwing the Princess Royal hundreds of feet into the air. She floated upside down, as her body was enveloped in blue flames. From within the flames, a bright and beautiful smile appeared on her face. She opened her mouth and spoke in a gentle voice, "Do you still dare to hold me hostage?" When the group of warriors, who were chasing Zen, saw this, they were delighted. Where did the flames come from? Have you forgotten the princess's title? Princess of God-burning flame. The God-burning flame is her theurgy. That's how she burst into flames. As the martial artists saw this, they knew that the Princess Royal would be fine. At least, there was nothing that Zen could do about her. The princess was born with this strand of God-burning flame within her. After her birth, the God-burning flame had turned her biological mother into ashes. When she grew up and found out about this unfortunate event, she felt very guilty. As a result of this, she had a great hatred for her innate theurgy. Thus, although the Princess Royal possessed the title, very few people dared to mention it. Furthermore, she herself rarely used this theurgy. Zen's cultivation base was an entire realm lower than the princess's, but she was still unable to break free from his grip. She had used this theurgy as a last resort. But she hesitated before using her special powers. Her goal was not to kill Zen. If somebody was tainted with the God-burning flame, they would definitely die. Therefore, when she used her theurgy, she slowed down a bit to allow him to loosen his grip. Zen's reaction was just as she hoped. In almost an instant, he had tossed her away. Boom! After spinning once in the air, the Princess Royal lightly tapped her toes on the ground. The temperature of the burning flame was very high, and as it crept down her toes, the soil beneath her feet instantly melted, creating a ripple like water. Zen had no idea what was going on, so he had tried his best to protect himself before chucking the princess away. But when he observed the flame, a strange smile appeared on his face. The Princess Royal was perplexed when she saw his expression. Shouldn't this fellow be helpless and surrender at this point? However, after 3 seconds, his figure suddenly flashed and pounced on her. Ah, no, she screamed. At this moment, she wasn't worried about herself, but Zen. He would be burnt crisp. Surely, Zen must have known that he should not touch the flame, but he still charged at her. In her opinion, this was no different than suicide. And so, a weird scene played out. The Princess Royal was like a dragonfly as she whizzed about in the air and kept stomping down on the ground. The soil beneath her feet melted in an instant, forming a large scorched mud puddle. The trees around her carbonized as well and turned into charred dead wood. However, she had retreated to save Zen's life. Like a poisonous hedgehog, she desperately backed away, afraid that she would hurt him. The small army behind them didn't dare to make any wrong moves in a hurry. The spirit transformation realm martial artists were well aware of the power of the flame on the princess's body. If they got too close to her, they would surely lose their lives. Don't come here, I'll set you ablaze, she warned in a panic. Her Thurgy was extremely special. When she was young, she had never been able to gain complete control over it, and even those in the divine land were unable to explain the origins of the flame. As a result, as she grew up, she would often accidentally ignite the flame and burn down large portions of her house. There was a look of pure horror in her eyes now. Chapter 1472, Determined. As she grew up with her special Thurgy, there were many people who had died under her flame. The people in her clan viewed her Thurgy as an extremely powerful talent. However, to her, it was the fiend that she looked down upon as a curse. It saddened her when she found ordinary people trembling when they stood before her. Nobody dared to approach her, fearing that they would be burned to death if they weren't careful. A shudder went through the servants every time they had to serve her. The funny part was these servants had received special training. Yet somehow their fear of perishing became full-fledged when they faced her. Nobody could teach them to restrain their fear when facing the Princess Royal. After all, the fear of death was the most intense fear. Every unexpected movement from the Princess Royal prompted them to overreact. Some people might think of this as power, but that wasn't how the Princess Royal looked at it. Every time she sensed them jittering in front of her, she realized they treated her as a monster. She loathed nothing more than their stiff bodies. How I wish they would act with ease. I am facing a bunch of robots, she would think with frustration. At the age of 13, she had burned a playmate to death. Her own actions caused her endless grief. She felt akin to a hedgehog that could not hide its poisonous spikes. Her mere presence meant danger to others. This incident had cast a shadow on her heart, and it still weighed in her mind now. But the more powerful her blue flame was, the happier her brother would be. Even her own father looked at her power as a bliss. They had done quite a bit of research about this flame, but they had never uttered a word about it before her. They were well aware of her aversion towards her own power. However, after coming to the Divine Refinement Forbidden Land, she was feeling better. Almost all the warriors in the Divine Refinement Forbidden Land had been accustomed to bloodshed. When she was with them, she wasn't looked at as an outcast. Their lives were full of killing and blood. There might be great danger to be around them, but such danger was nothing in their eyes. Of course, this also had something to do with the levels of the opponents she encountered after her cultivation and strength became stronger. After reaching the spirit transformation realm, all of the martial artists she faced reacted very quickly, and if she wasn't able to control herself well enough when the blue flame erupted, others were able to avoid it easily. But the shadow in her heart had never completely dissipated. Every now and then she still thought about it. In theory, she didn't want to use the blue flame unless it was a life and death situation. Moreover, the Princess Royal had no intention of killing Zen. Out of panic, the Princess Royal retreated continuously like a dragonfly that skimmed on the water's surface. But she still wasn't able to avoid Zen. "Don't," she screamed the moment Zen threw himself at her. Seeing the look of panic on her face, Zen found it a bit strange. However, her anxiety didn't stop him from moving towards her. With his strong hands, he grabbed the princess and pulled her into his arm. Without wasting any time, he rushed forward. The warriors behind were all stunned by his move. They had seen people risking their life to fight, but they had never seen someone seek death like Zen had done. Is he a fool? They all wondered. None of the warriors could figure out what was going on in this fellow's mind. Their confusion was only temporary because they quickly discovered that this youth's Thurgy seemed to be beyond their imagination. The flame from the Princess Royal body quickly spread across Zen's body, and in an instant, the two of them turned into a huge fireball, burning fiercely in the air. Countless golden vortexes appeared on the surface of Zen's body, rapidly absorbing the princess's flame. Years ago, her childhood friend was burned to death in this same manner. This dreadful memory once again flashed across her eyes. Her mind replayed the scene where she watched in despair as her playmate was being burned. She held onto her friend tightly, only to find nothing but ashes in her hands. At this moment, the princess dreaded that the same thing would repeat all over again. However, when she raised her head to look at Zen, she saw that his sturdy body was absorbing her flame continuously. This man, it turned out, was not afraid of her flame. That prophecy is true. The Princess Royal head throbbed incessantly. Every time when night fell, she still chose to leave the timeless town. Her goal was to find the warrior that was teleported into this world and had landed on the glitter gold goby. A few days ago, a member from the celestial soul race came to the timeless town, but he was selling falling crystal flowers in the town. The origin of the celestial soul was a mystery. They were ubiquitous in the Divine Refinement Forbidden Land, but they were not the aboriginals of the Divine Refinement Forbidden Land. Moreover, they did not seem to come from the various universes, and there was no such race in the divine land. Some people took them for the soul race, but they were fundamentally different from each other. Now it turned out that the information provided to her by the celestial soul person was right. A creature had indeed appeared on the glitter gold gobi, and this creature was capable of taking her to the soul-suppressing cliff. However, except for the princess, no one else believed this. At this moment, she felt elated for having had faith in this information. She had chosen to take a risk and now it had come to fruition. I have finally found him. He is right in front of me, she thought delightfully. In spite of her happiness, there was a part that was still unsure if this person could truly take her to the soul-suppressing cliff. However, upon discovering that this young man could actually resist her blue flame, she was 80% sure that this man was the person she was looking for. Although no one could figure out the origin of her flame, it was still an abnormal flame that petrified even her own father. How did this man manage to do it? She wondered in awe. However, Zen didn't have the slightest idea about the thoughts that were running through this woman's mind. He firmly grasped her and madly rushed forward. Suddenly, a loud thud came from behind them, similar to that of thunder. In such a short period of running, Zen had already brought this woman over 100 miles with him. However, the violent sound coming from behind was deafening. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't ignore it. It was like something was exploding right near their ears. The formless sky python began to move again. The two world lords had failed to stop it. In the end, the formless sky python wasn't something that the world lords could defeat easily. Even though they had used the wishing spell to seal the formless sky python off, the formless sky python still managed to break free. However, it could still be considered a feat for these world lords to have controlled the formless sky python for so long. However, Zen's expression changed when he realized what was happening. His eyes caught the sight of the huge shadow in the distance when it suddenly began to prostrate on the ground. The second it touched the ground, the whole place began to tremble under its power. The formless sky python seemed to be coming at them. The target of this formless sky python was neither Zen nor the two world lords. It was after the woman that Zen was holding. At first, the princess hadn't realized this. But as soon as the revelation began to sink in, her face paled. Sorry, Zen said as he tried to release this woman. Now he didn't want her anywhere near him. Once he understood this woman was the source of all the trouble, he had no intention of saving her. After all, this had nothing to do with Zen. Normally, when someone was in danger, Zen wouldn't sit and watch. He was by no means a cold-blooded person. However, he had his own reasons for not trying to save this lady. Firstly, she was trying to capture him, so strictly speaking, she was not a friend but an enemy. Secondly, Zen had just entered the divine refinement forbidden land, hence he didn't have the ability to fight the formless sky python. With all the responsibilities he was carrying on his shoulder, he had no intention of taking another burden. I can't just die here, he thought with finality. After the princess was released, she glared at the golden figure of Zen, full of rage. She had completely forgotten about her previous rude actions towards Zen. Now she could think of nothing but his cowardliness. What a ruthless man, he is keeping me here to die, she thought spitefully. Zen, however, didn't care about what she thought. With determination, he dashed forward, holding on to his dear life. The princess clenched her teeth and decided to follow him. Just a second ago, I was afraid I would burn you to death. But it turns out you deserve to be burned to death. The Princess Royal angrily spat as she almost caught up with him. I'm not afraid of your flame, so there is no way you can burn me to death. Why did you say I deserve to die? Don't follow me, Zen impatiently warned. No, I won't stop following you. The princess braced herself and dashed forward. Kenan and Woodrow were unable to stop the formless sky python and she didn't know what her next move should be. This young man was a complete stranger. However, the information given by the legend of the Celestial Soul member and the fact that Zen had devoured her flame made her want to place her hopes on Zen. She liked to believe that extraordinary people had extraordinary methods. This was something her father had taught her. Even though the person in front of her was only at the Spirit Supreme realm, there was something about him that told her that he was capable of defeating anyone. She was so lost in her thoughts that her eyes weren't actually looking at Zen. Swiftly, he turned around, pulled his sword and struck out with it. Whoosh! The sword was extremely sharp. All the trees 10 miles around were cut down in a swift motion. The sword radiance arced through the air, heading straight for the princess. If the princess wanted to dodge, she could have done it by lowering her head or lifting her body. In truth, Zen had intentionally controlled the speed of his strike so that she had enough time to dodge. However, she didn't seem to have any intention of dodging. She still maintained her height in the sky as she followed behind Zen. Just as the sword radiance reached the princess's ear and was about to chop her head off, screams rang out from several thousand feet behind her. The warriors that followed the princess were greatly shocked. When these spirit transformation realm martial artists saw that the formless sky python had broken free from the control of the two world lords, all they could think of was to run for their lives. However, they might not end well if they left the princess behind. And it would be even worse by being eaten by the formless sky python. In such a dire situation, they had no choice but to follow Zen and the princess. On the other hand, Zen's sword radiance finally stopped right beside the princess's ear. A part of the hair above her left ear was chopped off. And a small cut was left by the sword radiance on her tiny ear where blood droplets began to ooze out. But the princess's face looked as determined as ever, and she showed no signs of giving up. Chapter 1473, Swallowed. Zen's spirit was a tumult of conflicting emotion, but his face merely betrayed confusion. He hesitated. After everything, he did not have the heart to kill this woman. The ground shook beneath him. His breath caught as he saw the massive body of the formless sky python rushing towards him. As he turned to run, bursts of wind began to form underneath his feet, propelling him forward. Behind him trailed the Princess Royal. She had a sly smile on her face as she flew through the air. Her strength was that powerful, but she had cultivated her own cultivation method diligently. She easily matched his speed, and even began to overtake him. He raced forward, and she followed steadily in his wake. The martial artists of the spirit transformation realm had formed a procession behind her and kept pace. The beast seemed less than 100 miles away from them. Suddenly, in one swift motion, it wound up like a coil and sprang into the air with an agility that belied its size. Zen thought that it must have crossed at least 10 miles with that leap alone. Such was the beast's immensity and power. Though the party continued to flee, they all looked back when they heard a low and terrible rumbling. As the earth groaned, they saw the great animal rear one of its heads up and then smashed it down from the height of tens of thousands of feet. Their breath caught in their throats. Then, without warning, the winds parted and the monstrous head raced down towards them, its numerous eyes gleaming. The air trembled with a sound like thunder, as the first head of the formless sky python, vast as a mountain, fell from the sky. Zen's face froze in shock and the Princess Royal began to panic. The warriors of the spirit transformation realm turned white with fear. Run, it's coming down, burn the blood essence. No, it's too late. We can't escape this. Faster than they could believe, the giant head came rushing down. Its massive shadow created a canopy of darkness over the land. If they wanted to survive, they all knew they had to run out from under that shadow as fast as they could. Zen suddenly heard the Princess Royal draw a deep breath. He turned and saw her heave in and out as the oil paper umbrella in her hands began to spin, emitting a faint glow. By now, it was pulling her forward as she sprinted. She flew with blistering speed, overtaking Zen in a heartbeat. His fear returned, however, when he once again saw the beast's head. Only 4,000 feet above us now, he breathed. He looked back at the horizon and surmised that there must be at least another 20 miles until they were all out of the shadow, and safe from being crushed by the formless sky python's head. 20 miles is nothing at this speed, he said to himself. The wind howled and the sky seemed to crack like a whip. As Zen glanced up towards the noise, he suddenly realized that he was wrong. The great beast's head was rushing down even faster than before. It was now closing in on him. Even at his speed, he wouldn't be fast enough to escape. He despaired, and wondered if he was fated to meet his end here in the divine refinement forbidden land. He had never thought that he would be swallowed up by an enormous beast right after he landed in this world. He felt helpless, but he also wouldn't accept it. He couldn't believe that this would be the end. Before his journey into the divine refinement forbidden land, he had prepared thoroughly. He had even thought to use the fairy palace as his refuge. He would have used the token of the mountain to drill into the fairy palace if he encountered great trouble or danger, and inside he would be safe. The head of the celestial position race, however, had told him that he could not flee the divine refinement forbidden land in this way. In other universes or in the divine land, Zen could have easily entered the fairy palace through the space node created by the token of mountain whenever he wished. Be that as it might, it was apparently one of the cardinal rules of the divine refinement forbidden land that no one was to use any unnatural methods, like portals or space treasures, to leave there. Zen, confused by this law, asked for an explanation. The head of the celestial position race had thus told him that while building a space node and hiding inside of it was an extremely rare feat in the universe, it was commonly practiced in the divine land. Great heroes and talents from various universes and divine land could enter the divine refinement forbidden land in this way. Divine as it was, there were still rules that had to be followed here. If everyone from the divine land were to bring a space treasure to enter the divine refinement forbidden land and use it whenever they encountered any danger, the significance of the existence of the divine refinement forbidden land would disappear. The crack of thunder brought him out of his reverie. Zen's strength was at its limit, and he was running faster than he ever had before, but the formless sky python's head was falling ever closer. He kept his eyes focused on the edge of the shadow, calculating the distance left. Only 6 or 7 more miles, he said. I probably would have escaped by now if I hadn't turned to slash at the Princess Royal earlier, he thought to himself. The formless sky python's mouth stretched open, and the sight within chilled Zen to his core. It reminded him of a hollow tube of bamboo, with sickly spikes spiraling from its lips all the way to the depths of its stomach. It was a staircase to perdition. Nothing less. At such a close distance, Zen could smell the deathly aura that emanated from the beast's belly. It smelled of rage, blood, and death. He wanted to vomit even as he ran. The numerous eyes around the beast's head had all trained to look at the Princess Royal. Zen was close enough that he could see the woman's reflection in all of those eyes, like a kaleidoscope of numerous mirrors on a wall. Suddenly, a fair and slim arm grabbed him. It was the Princess Royal, holding her umbrella in one hand and Zen in the other. She summoned her full strength and they raced even faster, far faster than Zen would have been able to go on his own. They were both out of breath by this point, but they had no choice. They had to keep going. The rotating umbrella seemed to exude a strange force that removed all resistance in their way. Air parted in front of them, and the ground turned to a blur beneath their feet. The wind built into a roar in Zen's ears. There was a sound like the splitting of the earth and the crash of 10,000 thunderbolts. The formless sky python drove through the earth like a spear through flesh. The tumult of sound had come from behind them. They managed to escape. As the massive body of the formless sky python drilled into the ground, the earth gave way and a tsunami of rock was sent rippling outward, its crests like mountains and troughs like valleys. The wave hit Zen and the princess, pushing them forward in the hurricane of dust. After 10 miles, the cloud had lost its strength and the waves had returned to the ground. The two caught up in the wind, and continued to fly forward. Shock, terror, they saw carnage as they spun around. The procession of spirit transformation realm warriors following the princess had long disappeared without a trace, swallowed in the bowels of the formless sky python. The ground continued to heave and howl. It was as if a storm had come, showering lightning everywhere. The colossal body of the formless sky python had by now disappeared into the ground. Though the world thrashed around them, there was no longer any trace of the beast. Don't stop, keep moving forward, cried Zen. They had managed to escape death, but he knew the chase wasn't over. The ground beneath wouldn't protect them. It would fold like paper in the face of the formless sky python's power. In fact, at that very moment, the formless sky python slid through the dark underground like a crocodile through water, poised to strike at any time at the hapless figures on the surface. The speed at which it now moved was something they hadn't even considered. Just as Zen's voice faded away, the ground below them suddenly caved into a massive pit thousands of feet in width. Just as quickly, the dirt and the trees disappeared, and above them yawned the jaws of the formless sky python. The beast had erupted out of the earth and now rushed into the sky, attempting to swallow the Princess Royal and Zen whole. The both of them had jumped away in the nick of time, however, and were caught on top of the formless sky python's mouth as they rocketed into the sky. Zen's mind raced, but there was nothing he could think of. The teleportation token and the token of the mountain weren't available, and there didn't seem to be any other means of escape. In the face of such a powerful and vast monster, any ordinary martial artist was unable to resist. Only the Supreme Lords would be able to save them, and even then only temporarily suppress the beast. Their hearts sank once more. I'm sorry for getting you into this predicament, said the princess. Zen turned to look at her. She had spoken calmly while holding her oil paper umbrella. Her features were soft and sincere, and her beautiful, sad eyes were fixed on Zen's. Zen felt like cursing. What was the use of apologizing? Now of all times, and here of all places. She simply shouldn't have tried to capture me from the start, he thought to himself. All he wanted to do now was to summon his strength to fight the formless sky python, but he was drained and weak. He felt that he wouldn't be able to beat the monster even if he tried. Instead, he merely grabbed the princess's arm and they flew upwards, trying to escape. The formless sky python's head rose rapidly, trying to swallow the two of them into its mouth. They desperately tried to fly faster, but the jaws of the beast had formed walls around them, leaving them nowhere else to go but upward. They strained with their speed as they felt clouds whip by them in a flash, but the formless sky python's jaws grew taller and taller around them. The jaws began to close. Suddenly, the formless sky python froze, turning rigid mid-flight. Zen and the Princess Royal were stunned. They looked up to discover that, only a few hundred miles away, Kenan and Woodrow had appeared and had once again cast their wishing spells. They had sealed the other head of the formless sky python. The formless sky python had two heads at both ends, and when its tail was sealed, it meant that one of its heads became sealed as well. As its tail head was taken care of, the head under Zen and the princess's feet could no longer rise any further. "It's done," whispered Zen in disbelief. He had never felt so overjoyed to be alive before. He dragged the princess with him, leaping over the huge mouth of the formless sky python, escaping from the mouth that led to the abyss. Before he could say anything else, however, violent tremors thundered out into the heavens. The tail of the formless sky python was thrashing madly, struggling to escape its bounds. Chapter 1474, Chaotic Force Field. It didn't matter how loud the noise behind them became, they weren't stopping anytime soon. The formless sky python wasn't very intelligent, but Zen had no idea why it had locked its target on the princess. They rushed at a speed that led them thousands of miles away in under 5 minutes. If any strange beasts lurked ahead of them, they didn't have time to think about it. All they could think of was to try their best to distance themselves from the formless sky python. This time, a rumbling sound rang out from behind. The enormous creature continued to follow them. It looked like the formless sky python wouldn't stop until it devoured the woman beside Zen. They didn't know how Kenan and Woodrow were doing. All they could do was try their best and get away as soon as possible. This thick forest land stretched for 1,000 miles. They'd gotten some distance ahead when a massive lake appeared before them. They had gradually moved onto the highlands, from plains to hills. Despite them running at full speed, the distance between them and the formless sky python was quickly closing. "Ah, look out!" the princess suddenly cried out. The oil paper umbrella she was holding came to an abrupt halt in midair. "What's wrong?" Zen frowned. He didn't know how to deal with this woman, especially since he could neither kill her nor shake her off because she was so stubborn in following him. All they could do right now was escape together. But it was still somewhat baffling to Zen as to why they had gone in the same boat. "In front of us is the territory of the collapsing mountain race. It is one of the divine refinement forbidden land's aboriginal races," the princess replied. "Aboriginals? Are they dangerous?" This woman was referring to the collapsing mountain race as aboriginals, and Zen knew from this that the princess was from the divine land. The princess pursed her lips and replied, "It's hard to say. The aboriginals of the divine refinement forbidden land have a strong enmity towards outsiders, but it's not all impossible for us." Before she could finish talking, Zen had rushed out, muttering under his breath about how this woman lacked judgment. They would die if they remained where they were. But if they continued onward, they might still have a chance of survival. The choice was easy. Zen had, however, forgot the fact that the princess had taken a huge risk to go search for a warrior that had landed on the teleporting areas like Zen after night had fallen. If the collapsing mountain race could make someone like the princess hesitate, it wasn't going to be simple. The princess hesitated for a moment before catching up with Zen. She knew she had no other choice. If the current situation were anything to go by, even if the princess were able to enter the safe area, the formless sky python would still be able to follow her. No one knew how many people were going to die then. And no one knew when they would come out once they entered the territory of the collapsing mountain race. A rumble sounded from behind them as a huge shadow emerged from one lake and dove into another. "Ah!" the princess huffed and followed Zen. Zen discovered the strangeness of this place as he passed through the hilly area. He had been flying at a constant height of 70 to 80 feet, and it was only now that he found that a few stones were scattered in the air, floating lazily. Zen picked up a small stone and examined it carefully, only to discover that it was just an ordinary stone. There wasn't anything special about it. Zen tossed it away and it fell down, carving a parabolic path as it went. This stone very obviously was not a floating stone, which he had met several times in the universe. The princess watched as Zen explored the place and said, "It is the collapsing mountain race's force field. It's almost in a disorderly state, but it is very special." Zen nodded at her explanation. Zen knew everything about the inner world and the structure of the universe. The more mature the inner world was, the stricter the rules would be. The universe that Zen came from was an inner world of a holy being. It was as Roche had said, that the holy being had one foot in the grave. But the structure of the world from the bottom up, the lower world to the upper world and then to the stars, was complete. The rules were almost the same, but at different levels. But the divine refinement Forbidden Land was not a complete universe. It had probably been intentionally made this way by the holy being who built it, which was why its rules were quite strange. The further he went, the more stones he saw floating in the air. The stones grew in size as they traveled. Fist-sized stones, then, millstone-sized stones. They floated slowly in the air, as if they were weightless. Zen also sensed the chaotic force field, but its power was insignificant at the moment, which was why it wasn't having much of an impact on Zen and the princess. The colossal body of the formless sky python jumped from one lake to another. Every time it dove into a lake, its 10,000-foot wide body would occupy the entire lake, draining it of water and forming a small tide that flowed towards other lakes. But it was still wandering the lakes and did not follow Zen and the princess into the territory of the collapsing mountain race. This gigantic beast was also hesitating. After the formless sky python had rolled about 7 or 8 times, the lakes began to crack and connect together to form an enormous lake. Seemingly unable to endure the temptations of its target, this formless sky python had finally made up its mind. It chose to move forward to go beneath a great mountain. As the mountain shook violently, the formless sky python created a massive cave that was tens of thousands of feet high. "It's coming. We need to speed up." Zen could tell from the trembling of the earth that the formless sky python was getting closer and closer to them. They slowed down as they entered this area. Conducting necessary exploration was a useful way of survival for martial artists when they entered a strange place. But the crisis behind them told Zen that they did not have time to bother with what was happening here. Other threats were nothing compared to the threat of the enormous being behind them. But it wasn't long before Zen realized that he was ridiculously wrong in thinking thus. In the beginning, they had been able to choose to avoid the floating stones as they traveled. But as the rumbling sounds drew closer, Zen cleared a path, smashing aside all the stones along the way. He had previously absorbed the flame from the princess's body into his own, but his body had not reached a new level. This flame was effective on Zen, but the amount he had absorbed was just not enough. It was obvious that this woman was quite useful to him. If he could get out of this crisis, he would ask her to have him absorb more flame to temper his body. As he advanced at a high speed, Zen broke apart one huge stone after another. The stones he encountered at first were yellowish-brown sandstones. But as he went ahead, he saw stones that were colored blood red. These were iron ores, slightly harder than the previous ones. But they were no different to Zen, who shattered them to pieces with a single hit. As they advanced, the red stones gradually disappeared and cyan stones began to appear. These stones were columnar in shape and were twice as hard as the iron ores. The stones they saw along the way changed colors from cyan to brown, then to blue, and then became crystal clear. They finally encountered black stones that Zen couldn't break. He had to take a detour, having failed to shatter the huge rocks. This way, he finally had to slow down. "I'll lead," the princess said, raising the oil paper umbrella in her hands. The umbrella's ribs folded backwards, making it look like a spear. Zen's interest was piqued as he saw the changes in the umbrella. He had always known, somehow, that this woman's umbrella was incredibly magical. The princess pointed the umbrella ribs towards the front and made it spin. A thin blue spiral slowly came into existence. It was thin as an arm and had a sharp tip, like a long, constantly twisting snake. The black stones shattered the moment the tip of the spiral touched them. Its power was beyond amazing. The princess was truly leading the way. Once they broke through the black boulders, silver floating boulders appeared once again before them. The princess rushed forward to break the silver boulders apart. But they had only flown about 70 or 80 feet when they felt a strong attraction force pulling them over. This force was too great for them to resist it. The two of them felt dizzy for a moment. And then, they began to fall heavily towards the silver rocks. When they came back to their senses, they discovered that they were lying on top of a silver boulder. But they couldn't move their limbs. It was as if they were stuck to this silver boulder. Chapter 1475, The Strength Source. There was hardly a hair's breadth between Zen and the Princess Royal as they lay on the huge silver stone, which made it quite hard to turn over. The huge silver stone on the other hand emitted an irresistible force of attraction under the chaotic force field. "You can't move too, right?" Princess Royal asked. The two of them had been pressed too close against each other when they had fallen on the stone. After that, they kept glancing at each other like a first-time couple. "It's a little hard." Zen tried to shake his head, but it was extremely difficult to move his neck. The attraction force was far too powerful. The members of the collapsing mountain race are extraordinarily strong. It is said that if ordinary warriors enter their territory, they would instantly freeze, and only slaughter awaits them, the Princess Royal said with a smile. Zen stared at her, utterly speechless. You've known about this since a long time ago, right? This place is where the strength source is. Of course I've heard of it before. Then why did you still lead me here? Zen asked shrilly. Truth be told, he was rather annoyed. But we have no other way to go, Princess Royal stated calmly. Extreme sadness washed over Zen once again. This woman was not wrong. They wouldn't be able to get rid of the formless sky python no matter where they fled. It seemed that this place was the only area left where they could try their luck. I bet the formless sky python doesn't dare enter the collapsing mountain race's territory, the Princess Royal inferred. She had her own judgment of things, but she wasn't stupid. The Divine Refinement Forbidden Land was originally a trial ground. It was where warriors could grow and be promoted the fastest, and not even the Divine Land could compare to it. Yet since it was an extremely dangerous place, it came with much bigger risks. This Divine Refinement Forbidden Land was only the size of at least 3 supreme worlds. It had many trial grounds, and the collapsing mountain race guarded its strength source. The place was for body refiners to cultivate. What a pity, you must have guessed wrong, Zen said, a wry smile on his face. They heard the familiar sound of explosions again. Although Zen and the Princess Royal were within the huge silver stone, they could still see the ground and the mountains tremble. Rumble. It was as if an immense earthquake had occurred, and even the ground began to ripple like water. Clearly, a huge monster moved underneath. Zen inhaled deeply. At that moment, he wanted nothing more than to stand up and break free from the stone's constraints. However, it was impossible to do it with his own strength alone. Thus, he had no choice but to use the power of the dragon scales. The 9 genuine dragons and Zen had quite the conflict after the genuine dragons came to their senses. They had never communicated with Zen until now, but Zen was still able to use the cyan dragon's power. After he had poured all the power into his body, his entire being suddenly shook. What are you doing? The Princess Royal was astonished when she saw Zen's reaction. Stand up, Zen said through gritted teeth. Is he crazy? The Princess Royal thought. Her melodious laugh filled the tight space. Although it was hard to communicate with the collapsing mountain race, they didn't kill innocents. However, many martial artists chose not to enter unless they were fully prepared. If they got up from the stone, it only meant that they were really ready to enter this place. Therefore, many of the martial artists who had entered the place were stuck frozen to the ground like cold meat patties. It was impossible to cultivate or reach the strength source under such conditions. It's impossible, unless you have the cultivation base of a world lord, the Princess Royal said. The Princess Royal continued to talk, but she suddenly stopped when she saw that Zen had indeed gotten up. Meanwhile, the powerful suction force pressed Zen down firmly against the rock like a huge hand, which rendered him motionless. However, Zen had been infused with the power of the dragon scales. He eventually made use of the power and slowly lifted up his hands, feet, and then his waist. Finally, he bent his knees and tried to get up. How did you do it? You must have used some external force, the Princess Royal guessed. She was greatly perceptive and was quickly able to figure out that Zen didn't use his power alone. Zen nodded and did not deny it. His own strength would grow in time and besides, he couldn't rely on the power of the dragon scales forever. Since the collapsing mountain race's territory was a good place for body refining, how could Zen pass it up? Zen exhaled once more, straightened his back, and slowly stood up. It was just a simple standing motion, but Zen felt like he had carried a dozen mountains on his back. It was incomparably hard for him. Crack, crack, crack. His spine emitted an ear-splitting crack every time he stretched out. Even his divine weapon body found it hard to endure the pain. Zen was also confused. The collapsing mountain race had lived in the place for generations, so how could a baby born there bear such power? Even a martial artist who had become a world lord would find it immensely troublesome to withstand such an attraction force. Ordinary warriors who would enter this place would be instantly crushed into ground meat. As the Princess Royal stared on, Zen stood up. You're so amazing, she exclaimed with a giggle. After she had heard the flower vendor's prophecy, she was the first to believe that Zen was destined to be extraordinary. However, the Princess Royal came from the Divine Land and she believed that he was extraordinary because he was able to bring her into the soul-suppressing cliff. That was why she recklessly wanted to take him back at the beginning. Only now did the Princess Royal realize that she had underestimated this young man of the Spirit Supreme realm. Unfortunately, it's useless. Zen, who had stood up, looked ahead with a wry smile. Apparently, Zen had fallen horizontally towards the huge silver stone. He stood parallel to the ground once he had gotten up, and saw the scene below. The ground underneath the huge stones, which was several thousand feet long, began to cave in and form a small basin. Zen had already seen it before. It was a sign of the formless sky python's attack. Boom! The basin only existed for 3 seconds before it disappeared before Zen's eyes. The formless sky python suddenly rose upwards, wanting to swallow up the princess and Zen. The silver stones that floated in the air were naturally enormous, but they were actually nothing compared to the massive size of the formless sky python. On the other hand, the strong attraction force from the huge silver stone did not affect the formless sky python in any way. Zen had just arrived in the divine refinement forbidden land, but he had already fallen into danger thrice. It made him quite depressed as he thought that it was all pure bad luck. He believed that without the help of the 2 world lords, wishing spells, he wouldn't be able to escape this time. He lowered his head, and his gaze landed on the woman beside him. Just as when the Princess Royal was about to speak, Zen said, "You don't have to apologize to me. I'm just unlucky this time." However, the Princess Royal did not look sad. Instead, she smiled and said, "I'm not going to say sorry. Look over there." The Princess Royal was not a warrior who refined her body. Thus, she could not turn her head under the effects of the attraction force, and could only look straight ahead. Zen followed her gaze and saw a few figures from a near distance who rapidly approached the scene. Martial artists. Zen froze instantly. The members of the collapsing mountain race. The Princess Royal's face lit up as if she had personally seen the reinforcements. The warriors with bared arms had bronzed, toned muscles and looked very strong. Were they the members of the collapsing mountain race that the Princess Royal had spoken of? Based from their appearance alone, they seemed nothing special and were almost similar to ordinary humans. However, what surprised Zen was that these warriors actually jumped crazily on the silver stones at a shockingly high speed. They weren't affected by the attractive force at all. Perhaps there was some secret technique that allowed them to escape the attraction force. The formless sky python's huge mouth below only rose half the distance, and the members of the collapsing mountain race had arrived quickly. What happened next immediately corrected Zen's guess. The group of collapsing mountain members didn't escape from the attraction force at all. In reality, they were already used to the giant silver stone's attraction force due to their immense strength. Bang, bang, bang. 3 strongest men of the collapsing mountain race rushed in front and punched the formless sky python at the same time. The formless sky python, whose body was like a rapidly growing bamboo, rose slowly, only to be destroyed by the 3 fists when it was halfway up. Naturally, Zen was also a bit stunned. They had such a strong, formidable power to the point where Zen couldn't comprehend it. He thought that maybe after all the Cyan Dragon's dragon scales had been lit up, it could reach the same effect. Chapter 1476, The Collapsing Mountain Warriors. Zen's eyes practically popped out of their sockets as the colossal body of the formless sky python smashed to the other side, creating a deep hole in the ground. He hadn't expected this at all. Were the aboriginals of the divine refinement forbidden land really this powerful? The formless sky python was easily on the same level as a genuine dragon. Nevertheless, the power the 3 people released had directly knocked down the formless sky python. Boo! Boo! The formless sky python wailed. It wriggled twice in an attempt to right its position. The woman was prey and it wasn't about to let its meal go just like that. Just as it was to get up, the 3 collapsing mountain members went for the python and threw themselves into its vital point. They were relatively large and sturdy, standing at nearly 10 feet and as bulky as ogres, but next to the formless sky python, the 3 were comparable to grains of sand. Howl! Boom! At the impact of the 3's attack, the formless sky python once again crashed into the ground. With another howl, it twisted its body in frustration. It didn't dare disobey the collapsing mountain warriors any longer and with a loud rumbling sound, it drilled headfirst into the ground. Just before it completely disappeared, however, the head on the tip of its tail narrowed its eyes and roared at the princess. Seeing the group of 3 closing in on it again, it quickly followed the rest of its body and disappeared. Zen watched the formless sky python leave and asked the princess, "That thing seems to hold a very deep grudge against you. Why does it want to eat you so bad? What did you do to offend it?" From the very beginning, the thing had chased after the woman beside him. Was the princess's flesh really more delicious than the others? Was she really that appetizing to the formless sky python? "I did not do anything." The princess scowled. "If you didn't offend it, then why was it demon bent on eating you?" Zen wondered out loud. The princess pursed her lips. It was obvious she didn't want to tell Zen the truth, so he didn't pursue the topic any further. The warriors of the collapsing mountain race then approached. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. About 13 warriors stood in front of Zen. One by one, they went airborne and landed on silver boulders. Some of them stood on top of the boulders while others hung upside down, all of them attracted to the boulders like iron to a magnet. One of the 3 warriors who fought off the formless sky python landed on the same boulder Zen and the princess were on. The warrior sized up Zen, and a hint of surprise appeared in his eyes when he noticed his level of cultivation. With his cultivation at the Spirit Supreme realm, to be able to stand on his own was already amazing. Hand over your trial tallies. The warrior commanded. Zen frowned in confusion. What trial tallies? Unsure of the warrior's cultivation level, Zen felt a great deal of pressure. And as for the trial tallies, he honestly had no idea what they were. Anyone who barges into this place will die without a trial tally, the warrior said, clenching his fists. The strength that this warrior displayed was very much still vivid on Zen's mind. If he had so much as punched Zen once, Zen was sure his physical body would be smashed into smithereens. Alarmed, Zen glanced at the princess. She definitely knew more about the divine refinement Forbidden Land than him. However, when they barged into this place, she only said that the collapsing mountain warriors were very troublesome. She didn't mention anything about trial tallies. Zen swallowed. Was he going to be killed because he didn't have a trial tally? I have a trial tally, the princess smiled. In fact, I have several trial tallies. Zen felt his heart rate go back to normal. With her position, of course she'd have whatever this trial tally was. For the first time that day, Zen finally felt a stroke of luck. At least this woman wasn't all trouble. But unfortunately, I don't have them with me. The princess batted her eyes and smiled apologetically. Zen's face fell. The relief he felt vanished as quickly as it came. If you don't have the trial tallies, then die. The warrior bellowed. Kill them. At the command, the other warriors began to charge at the 2. Wait, wait, the princess cried out, halting the warriors. I am Pascal's younger sister. When the warrior heard this, he circled the 2 before landing heavily on the silver boulder. He stared at the princess in astonishment and suspicion, and tilted his head to size her up. He scanned her face, carefully looking for a resemblance to Pascal. Evidence. Evidence, the princess thought for a moment. My hairpin. The godly eagle horn that my brother obtained in the collapsing mountain race is in my hairpin. She blurted out. The warrior bent over and took out the girl's hairpin. The pin was multicolored, and when the light hit it in a certain way, the space law became faintly discernible. It was clearly a Sumeru space, but it possessed an aura that seemed to be even more perfect than the law power that Zen had seen. The warrior stretched out his hand and gently flicked it. The hairpin trembled, and in his hand, a black eagle horn appeared with a flash of light. He examined it for a moment and said, "It is indeed the one Pascal had hunted. However, you must hand over your trial tallies still." The princess smiled coyly. "For my brother's sake, please let us go this time. Or at least, let me ask my people to send the trial tallies here." In the past, her brother made an outstanding contribution to the collapsing mountain race and received the title, King Warrior, hailing him as a leader of the collapsing mountain race. Hesitation decorated the warrior's face as he turned to talk to the other warriors in their native tongue. After a short while, the collapsing mountain warrior turned back to Zen and the princess. "We will give you 20 days. You must produce your trial tallies by then, or we will bring hell upon you." And with that, he left. The collapsing mountain warriors had quite the temper, which made talking to them hard. But now that they were willing to do the princess a favor, it was clear just how important her brother was to them. Soon after, one of the collapsing mountain members jumped over and grabbed Zen and the princess. He threw them on his back like 2 sacks of potatoes and left with the rest. As soon as Zen left the silver boulder, he quickly regained his freedom and wasn't affected by the attraction force anymore. It had been like that from the very beginning. There was an invisible force field that surrounded the area. Anyone who entered would be sucked in, but after one managed to leave, they wouldn't be affected anymore. This was why the attraction force disappeared as the collapsing mountain warriors sped through the air. However, as the warriors continued to go deeper, more and more silver boulders appeared. Zen watched as the boulders transformed into the Earth's foundation. And with this transformation, the attraction force became greater the deeper they went. The 2 of them could only stare at each other and hold on tighter as the collapsing mountain warrior picked up speed. "Oh, I just remembered," the princess smiled after a while. "I haven't gotten your name yet." Deep inside, she felt increasingly uncomfortable as the pull of gravity became heavier. Her position on the collapsing mountain warrior's back didn't help too. Zen Luo, Zen answered truthfully. This was the first time Zen visited the Divine Refinement Forbidden Land. There was no need to lie about his name. I'm LaQuisha Han, she offered with a little smile. Zen, however, was not in the mood to talk. He was too concerned about what they were going to face next. On the other hand, LaQuisha Han couldn't seem to stop talking. She kept asking him questions such as why he was able to absorb her flames and not get burnt and what universe he came from. At her last question, Zen shook his head. I don't know which universe it is. It was true, living beings in a certain universe supposedly couldn't leave the universe they were in to go to another universe. That was how it had always been. But this was not applied to mighty warriors. How can that be? LaQuisha Han frowned. As someone of her status, she was able to see problems within the divine land and it was only natural that she would know much more than Zen. This time, however, she was the one who was unable to understand what was going on. Chapter 1477, Lying on the Ground. The members of the collapsing mountain race carried Zen and LaQuisha as they moved forward, and they eventually reached a large encampment. As these two individuals chatted along the way, Zen and LaQuisha gained a basic understanding of each other. The buildings of the encampment looked very primitive and seemed that they were made of the same kind of silver stones. The buildings' surfaces were embellished with different patterns, and although they looked rough, they seemed to be heavy and sturdy. After the collapsing mountain members entered the encampment, they threw Zen and LaQuisha down into a corner and left. The height of the collapsing mountain member's shoulders was less than 10 feet, but when he slammed Zen and LaQuisha down on the ground, the two of them let out muffled groans. Due to the effect of the strong gravitational force, the power behind the impact shouldn't be underestimated. Zen still felt all right. It was as if his internal organs were in turmoil, but he quickly returned to normal. LaQuisha, on the other hand, did not do too well. Her cultivation level was higher than Zen's, but she was still a woman and didn't pay particular attention to body refinement. The collapsing mountain member did not show her the slightest bit of mercy. After being thrown violently on the ground, she suffered an internal injury and a bit of blood dripped out of the corner of her mouth. Are you all right? Zen asked. LaQuisha was devastated. This kind of injury was nothing to her, but this kind of treatment was a bit of a blow to her. After being thrown onto the ground, the two of them were immobilized and could not get up from the ground. The strong gravitational force was almost everywhere. It felt like there were dozens of mountains on top of them. How difficult was it for them to get up? Zen could only activate the power of the dragon scales. The force of gravity here was much stronger than that on the huge silver boulder. Even though he already borrowed the power of the dragon scales, he still wasn't able to stand up. Finally, he rolled and sat up. He couldn't see anything while he had been lying on the ground. After he managed to sit up, he leaned on the wall beside him. Only then did he notice that there were a lot of other martial artists in that place, aside from him and LaQuisha. The martial artists had strange appearances. Some had green skin, some looked like dwarfs, and some were also very handsome. However, all of the martial artists here were humanoid in form. Why were most intelligent beings shaped similar to humans? Zen had thought about this long ago. Whether it was the sacred race, human race, demon knight race, or even ogres, the various races all developed their own culture and influence. Their common characteristic was that they were all bipedal. Their body shapes and appearances were different from each other, but the internal structures of their bodies were similar. The demon knight members only had long and sharp ears, while the ogres looked fiercer. Strange creatures, like the warriors of the sorcerer race, also had appearances that were not too different from human forms. Even the final forms of many legendary beasts seemed to be based according to human standards. Even in the Divine Refinement Forbidden Land, the warriors of the collapsing mountain race were also like this. This couldn't have been a coincidence. These martial artists were similar to LaQuisha. They were all at the top level of the spirit transformation realm. However, the martial artists were all lying motionless on the ground. When they saw that Zen was able to sit up, their facial expressions were very strange. They had noticed sometime earlier that Zen was only at the Spirit Supreme realm. Most of the warriors who were sent to the Divine Refinement Forbidden Land cultivated in the cities nearby the teleporting area. A place like this was not somewhere that a warrior at the Spirit Supreme realm could go to. Zen was different. The teleporting area where he was sent to had already been abandoned for countless years, and he was the only one sent there. Then he met LaQuisha. The two of them hid within the territory of the collapsing mountain race while they were being chased by the formless sky python. It was not that surprising that a Spirit Supreme realm warrior came to the territory of the collapsing mountain race. The problem was that this guy could sit up. My friend, you are not bad. You were able to sit up right after you arrived. You have innate divine strength. A warrior, who did not look human, said to Zen. Zen leaned against the wall and smiled when he heard this. I was just lucky. Lucky? Are you kidding me? I've been lying here for 3 years, but I've never heard of anyone who was lucky enough to sit up. The warrior told Zen incredulously. He has been lying here for 3 years. Upon hearing these words, Zen was also somewhat speechless. With such a strong gravitational force pulling them to the ground, even lying down here was a form of cultivation. If one gained the ability to stand up in the future, then they would be able to accept the collapsing mountain race's trial. If one obtained the strength source, then that would be a great leap for them. You have only been lying here for 3 years. I have already been here for 9 years. If I still can't stand up in the next year, I'm afraid that I would be driven out. Another warrior complained with a sullen face. Isn't it good to leave? Zen asked curiously. Lying here for 10 years was unbearable. Without the help of the collapsing mountain warriors, it would have been almost impossible for them to climb out. Zen didn't know what this martial artist was sad about. Nonsense. My trial tally will be wasted then. For the sake of this trial tally, I nearly lost my life. The warrior said dejectedly. Zen didn't realize that, before they had come here, LaQuisha told him that she had a lot of trial tallies. Zen naturally felt inclined to believe that it was easy to obtain a trial tally. He didn't know how many martial artists had sacrificed their lives in this divine refinement forbidden land just to obtain a trial tally. Some martial artists painstakingly obtained a trial tally and had to travel thousands of miles to enter the 6 great cultivation places. The collapsing mountain race was the cultivation place of body refiners, and many martial artists didn't hesitate to bring their trial tallies here. However, they all ended up being thrown onto the ground by the collapsing mountain warriors, left to lie motionless on the ground. This immobility often lasted for a few years. Some martial artists with innate divine strength were able to stand up on their own after a few months and gradually adapted to the gravitational force. They could then join the collapsing mountain race and underwent trials, until they completed them. Their strength and physical body would increase at an alarming rate. However, the majority of martial artists had to lie down here for 7 to 8 years before they could gradually stand up. For the spirit transformation realm warriors, this length of time wasn't a problem. But if they didn't stand up within 10 years, they would be expelled from the collapsing mountain race. It was hard for them to accept this. That was the reason why LaQuisha wasn't enthusiastic about going to the collapsing mountain race's place. She preferred to enter the soul-suppressing cliff, and there was no need for her to refine her body. If she was to be brought to the collapsing mountain race's territory, she needed to rely on herself to stand up and walk within 10 years if she wanted to exit. Otherwise, it was just a waste of her time. Her time was actually more valuable than that of ordinary martial artists. Several hours later, the spots of light at the top of the cave gradually regained their brightness one by one, emitting a faint light. Under the beams of numerous spotlights, night in the divine refinement forbidden land ended and the day finally came. The warriors around Zen were still lying motionless on the ground like corpses. Zen couldn't help but feel sorry for them as he thought about how hard it would be to remain in this position for 10 years without being able to move a single muscle. Suddenly, a roar came from the collapsing mountain race. Roar! One of the collapsing mountain members stood at the peak and began roaring towards the sky with all his might. At the same time, all of the other collapsing mountain members answered that person's roar, and they began to shout and sing. Zen didn't understand the song at all. They sang in the language of the collapsing mountain race and didn't really follow the rules of music. But beneath their rough and orderly voices, he sensed an extraordinary strength and a unique rhythm. What did they sing? Zen asked. LaQuisha curled her lips. Listen carefully. It's good for you. If you can stand up, you can carry me on your back and leave this place. She had no plan to refine her body and definitely didn't want to lie here for 10 years. After only a few hours of lying on the ground, she was already quite crestfallen. If she really lay here without moving, 10 years of her life would definitely have been wasted. LaQuisha thought it over for a few hours and realized that Zen was her only hope. This guy had just entered this territory and was already able to use his own strength to sit up. She naturally hoped that he could quickly adapt to the gravity here. The song is good for me. How? Zen had a look of confusion on his face for a short while, but soon felt something strange happen within his body. These sounds contained an unusual vibration, and the continuous roaring had resonated with Zen's body. With this resonance, the blood flow throughout Zen's body suddenly surged, and his heart rate also began to increase. As he looked at the other martial artists, all of them were flushed red. This collapsing mountain race was extremely unique. They were able to refine their bodies just by singing a song. Chapter 1478, Means. The collapsing mountain race seemed to be very primitive. Their social structure was still dependent on the authority of ancient clans. However, there were still many mysteries hidden within just awaiting discovery. It could even be said that they were cultivating with every move. For instance, the women of the collapsing mountain race would be pregnant for 30 years. During these 30 years, their babies would be baptized by the tribes singing every day. They would passively undergo body refining before they were born. During the process of body tempering, the fetus would gradually adapt to the gravitational force, and after it was born, it would have immense strength. Thus, when a baby from the collapsing mountain race was born, it would already be able to crawl across the ground. As for the spirit transformation realm martial artists present, they couldn't lift a finger. They weren't even comparable to an infant from the collapsing mountain race. This was why the collapsing mountain race took the trial tallies and dumped these martial artists here like trash. The collapsing mountain race worshipped powerhouses, but these fellows couldn't even compare to the little babies of their race, so they didn't care about them. They deserved to take the collapsing mountain race's trials, but only if they were able to stand up one day. The song of the collapsing mountain race lasted for a full 2 hours. Every day after dawn, they would howl like this for 2 hours. The collapsing mountain members actually had the strength to do so. This divine refinement forbidden land was filled with all sorts of strange things. Singing was originally a method of body tempering for this race, so it was considered normal. This strange ballad gave rise to a subtle vibration. It felt like countless small hammers, constantly hammering around Zen's body. He could feel the omnidirectional hammering beginning on the outside and working its way to the inside, slowly immersing itself in his body. Zen finally understood that this flesh refining method was similar to the principle of the grand weapon refining method that he practiced himself. However, the grand weapon refining method was intended to transform a person into a weapon and then make them undergo training. The purpose of the collapsing mountain race's method was to directly beat up their body. If Zen hadn't undergone the training to turn his body into a weapon, he definitely wouldn't have been able to withstand that kind of beating. His injuries would have become increasingly severe, and ordinary people naturally would not have access to his training. However, the power of vibration within this song was relatively mild. Under the resonance of this song and the powerful gravitational force here, the benefits for a body refiner were obvious. Listening to the song for a single day would cause the listeners' vital energy and blood to flow more rapidly and their flesh to tighten. If they continued to listen to it for a year, 5 years, or 10 years, the effects would be extraordinary. After 10 years, if a warrior still wasn't qualified to climb up and join the collapsing mountain race, after leaving this place, their physical body and strength would greatly increase. That was why the collapsing mountain race was considered to be a sacred place for cultivation. Once the song had finished, all of the collapsing mountain members started their daily hunting activities in an orderly fashion. The strength of the clansmen of collapsing mountain race was comparable to a world lord or a supreme lord. However, there was a sharp distinction between the ways they replenished their bodies. When they reached a certain level of training, world lords and supreme lords could feed on the vitality between heaven and earth, while the collapsing mountain warriors still had to rely on natural food and had to eat lots of food to replenish their strong bodies. If the martial artists that had entered the collapsing mountain race could one day stand up and gradually adapt to the gravity, they would also need to go hunting with them. However, currently, Zen and the other martial artists could only watch. When the people from collapsing mountain race left, the entire tribe immediately became quiet. Soon, however, many children appeared within the tribe. The collapsing mountain members were tall and sturdy, and while their children were still childlike in appearance, they were as well built as their parents. Some of the children were 7 or 8 feet tall, and would be considered large among the human race. After these children appeared, they began to play around in the tribe. Some of their pranks caused the tribe's women to shout at them. This was a normal day for the collapsing mountain race. After a while, a few children came rushing over. Uncle Toad. Uncle Toad, my wooden ox is broken. How can I fix it? This, Uncle Toad, who was the subject of the children's attention, was a martial artist who had come to take the trial. Just like Zen, he had managed to adapt to the gravitational force. However, he was still unable to completely stand up, and could only lie on the ground on all fours, motionless like a toad, which was where the children got the idea for his nickname. Seeing those children dashing around so effortlessly in the tribe, Zen sighed deeply in his spirit. They were truly inferior to even the children of the collapsing mountain race. No wonder those 3 clansmen were able to beat up the formless sky python. It was their strength that made this race so unique. While the children gathered around, Uncle Toad, the other martial artists could only look on with envy. Zen was confused at first, but then he realized that this, Uncle Toad, had used one of his skills to create an opportunity for himself. Behind each of these children was a small wooden ox. This wooden ox was exquisitely crafted, lifelike and ingenious. It had obviously been created with a unique puppet technique. This puppet technique was not indigenous to the collapsing mountain race. It was something that Uncle Toad had taught these children when he told them how to create their own puppets. The only thing that Zen could not understand was that the wooden ox was a puppet and could actually escape from the powerful gravitational force of the collapsing mountain race. Perhaps it was because of the materials from which it was made. Uncle Toad, my wooden ox's foot is broken. It looks like a cripple when it's walking. It is extremely ugly. Humph, who told you to start ox fighting? If it's broken, it's your own fault. You joined in the ox fighting too. Just as the kids were arguing, Uncle Toad chuckled and said, I can teach you how to repair the wooden ox leg, but you know what the rules are. Before Uncle Toad could finish speaking, one of the children took out a large black object and placed it in front of Uncle Toad. Uncle Toad, I've prepared a piece of meat. I saved it yesterday. That piece of black meat looked ordinary, but under the illumination of the light, it emitted a unique phosphorescent light. Zen didn't know what creature it was cut from, but from his point of view, it was absolutely extraordinary. Ha ha ha, then I will gladly accept it. Please help to tuck the meat in. Before Uncle Toad could finish his words, the child had already cut open the piece of meat with a knife and personally fed it to him. Not only did this martial artist teach them puppet techniques, but he also taught them how to use puppets to fight, which the children referred to as ox fighting. The materials used to make the wooden ox were not ordinary, but in a fight, the wooden ox would eventually break. Although Uncle Toad taught them how to make the wooden ox, he didn't tell them how to fix it. When it was broken, they must go to him to have it repaired. Uncle Toad would only fix the broken ox when they brought him pieces of meat in exchange. Only the warriors who participated in the hunting alongside the collapsing mountain race were allowed to eat meat. The warriors lying here weren't qualified. The benefits of the meat pieces were obvious. Naturally, some people would try to use their brains to get them. In truth, this Uncle Toad had only been with the tribe for a short period of time. It was only because he had eaten these pieces of meat that he was able to get up. So, clearly, this meat possessed a magical power. Maybe this scheme had been in his mind even before he had entered the collapsing mountain race. He is clever, Zen couldn't help but sigh. The children took out pieces of their own meat and fed them to Uncle Toad. After that, they left satisfied after Uncle Toad told them how to repair the wooden oxen. Before the children left, there were also other practitioners lying on the ground trying to steal business for themselves. I know how to fix that wooden ox too. I can tell you a story. Do you want to hear it? I can teach you guys how to make wooden birds. It's fun. However, almost all of the children's interest was focused on the wooden ox. The other martial artists attempted seduction, rarely proved effective, and the children soon disappeared without a trace. The group of warriors could not get up, and could only look helplessly at the backs of the group of swiftly vanishing children. Zen wasn't one of them. Since he had unintentionally entered the collapsing mountain race, it could be said that it was fate. According to what he had heard, this trial tally was extremely rare. Since he had come in here with her for free, naturally, he would seize this opportunity to fully refine his body. The day passed quickly, and by nightfall, the collapsing mountain race members had all returned to their tribe. Each of them was carrying a colossus on their shoulders. That was their reward for a day of hard work. There were single-horned bulls the size of a small mountain, red-blood eagles with a wingspan of over 1,000 feet, and heterogenetic porcupines covered with golden spikes. The abundance of prey left Zen dumbstruck. Chapter 1479, The Temptation. When these vicious beasts roamed this world, they were rightfully considered the overlords of the region. They ruled everything and were at the very top of the food chain. A few of them, even if only a handful, could actually take on human form. Their power was truly undeniable. The warriors in this place though, despite the overruling strength of the vicious beasts, were even more powerful than they were. Here, they were reduced into food for the collapsing mountain members. A bloody horror show had begun in the center of the space, an area no more than 10,000 feet wide. Together, the members of the collapsing mountain race formed an irregular-shaped circle around the mass of dead bodies. A beastly demolition, one might say. Only certain members of the collapsing mountain race were deemed with the responsibility for dismantling the beasts, and they effected their work with great skill and precision. The beasts were picked apart one by one, the race members working like a team. It wasn't long before entire flaps of skin were being peeled back, a ripping sound resonating against the walls of the confined area. Blood soaked the ground, creating dark red, almost black puddles at their feet. The beasts were dismembered, their flesh cut clean, their bones removed and their tendons torn. For an onlooker, the scene was extremely traumatic and sickening. Disgusting, even. However, these beasts were comparable to a world lord, and every part of their bodies was extremely valuable, to say the least. With careful and quick work of their weapons, the collapsing mountain members dismembered the beasts in no time. Once all the beasts were taken apart, the working members took a step back. A strong stench of blood suddenly hit them. There was so much blood and the smell was so strong. With a quick glance around the space, it was clear that the martial artists and the children were used to the scene and the stench. The martial artist staying next to Zen appeared to be feeling particularly uncomfortable. His breathing seemed labored and he clenched his chest with his hand, his facial expression distorted. The other martial artists were in a similar state. They gasped for air while lying on the ground with their eyes closed. Of course, from their angle, they couldn't see all of what was really going on. Zen, on the other hand, had his back pressed up against the wall, and from where he was sitting, he could observe the entire scene. Earlier, before the blood show, Zen had discovered a multitude of grooves at the center of the square. At the time, he had thought that there was perhaps some form of giant magical array located there, but he understood better now. The collapsing mountain race didn't need to use any kind of magical array. Those grooves, also known as the blood grooves as he learned, were only used to divert the blood pouring from the vicious beasts they tore apart. The grooves were necessary due to the incredible amount of blood that could come from a single berserk beast. Once the fierce beasts were sliced open, the blood gushed like a river, and without the blood grooves to divert the flow, the tribe would probably flood in a sea of red. The beasts' blood essence was extremely vigorous. Zen didn't know where the blood traveled to or where they accumulated it all. What he did know though, was that such a large amount of blood from such powerful berserk beasts would be unbelievably precious. Once the beast slaughter was done and taken care of, it was time to celebrate. Enormous bonfires began to grow ablaze one after another, their orange-yellow flames filling the darkness with a warm glow. With celebrations like these, the members of the collapsing mountain race only used a special kind of wood. When they burned it, it gave off a unique fragrance. Their nostrils flared as they inhaled deeply, the smoke and fragrance burning the back of their throats. It felt like victory. Zen might not have eaten in a few years, but the smell overwhelmed him with a sudden, shocking hunger. The wood's fragrance worked on his appetite, causing his stomach to grumble. Zen thought that the smell would make anyone hungry, even a human. Growl. Did Zen's stomach grumble so loudly that he heard it himself? A look of confusion washed over his face. He turned around and paid closer attention to those surrounding him. Suddenly, he could hear a series of grunts, grumbles and groans coming from all directions around him. Laquisha was lying not too far off from Zen. He watched her as she grabbed her gut, as if to stop it from rumbling. Even her stomach was growling out of hunger right now. Of course, every martial artist present had trained for far longer than Zen had. Worse off than him in his opinion, they hadn't eaten anything in over 10,000 years. The fragrant cyan wood filled their lungs and forced them all into the hands of temptation. Ah, here they go again. Every time night falls, it's the hardest time to endure. I'm getting sick and tired of it. It just really makes me want to dig my teeth into a piece of meat so bad. Awoo, a warrior could even be heard crying and wailing into the night. The hunger pains had become overwhelming. The martial artists felt as though they were on the brink of starvation. The overwhelming and delicious smell of burning wood was like a poison, one that made them all feel terribly hungry. It was true that when martial artists had gone through the Soul Sea realm, the Spirit Supreme realm, and the Spirit Transformation realm, their willpower became much stronger than any ordinary person. Martial artists having crossed such realms could even endure the cruelest of tortures without shedding a single tear. Not all of them reached such extents, but those who did were bound to be the successors of certain extremely powerful forces or amazing talents. If the latter wasn't the case, the martial artist in question would have led a life of torment and pain. Currently though, and now more than ever, these martial artists had actually become incomparably weak. Temptation was breaking them. This can't be possible. Zen was completely shocked by the warrior's reactions, his eyes darting from one martial artist to another. Laquisha was lying on the ground, but upon hearing Zen's words, she said, "That is the calamity-dispelling wood, and the fragrance it emits is the calamity-dispelling fragrance which can activate the most primitive and original appetite of all living beings. This kind of wood is a special product of the divine refinement Forbidden Land." To the north of the collapsing mountain race, there was an immense, lush forest known as the calamity-dispelling forest. Most of the trees in the forest were tens of thousands of feet high. The forest covered several acres and the trees were so thick with foliage that one couldn't see the sky above them when walking through it. Here, the calamity-dispelling trees emitted the faint fragrance all the time. No need to burn their wood. In the calamity-dispelling forest, all living beings' desires were magnified countless times over. These creatures' instincts were also stimulated to their absolute limit. From small reptiles and ants to big birds, from low-level creatures to top of the food chain beasts, their sensations were amplified and their strongest desires were aroused. They crazily devoured one another and killed each other. At the same time, they copulated frantically and continued the cycle with their offspring. It was a hell on earth for those who lived here and coupled here and for the young that were raised here. On the other hand though, this frantic breeding ground was a living paradise for the growth of any vicious beast. A martial artist entering the calamity-dispelling forest would just as much end up giving in to their most basic desires. Anyone breathing the oxygen provided by these trees would fold beneath the pressure of temptation in no time. All desires were pushed to their extremes, even the most insignificant. After the desires to eat, to love and to possess had been magnified countless times, people would act like the beasts. They light these bonfires and eat heartily here every day. These people, who have stayed here for a long time, also know that it is time for the members of the collapsing mountain race to eat, so they stimulate their appetite, Laquisha explained calmly. Zen nodded. There's no wonder their eyes lit up the way they did when they saw that piece of meat earlier. How long have they endured this? Years and years at the very least. Anyone who was tied up, cuffed and forced to look at delicious food that they could not consume every day would go insane. Sure, the warriors were strong-willed, but this torture was on another level. The calamity-dispelling fragrance in the air disturbed their levels and notions of desire, making self-control impossible. As Zen spoke, his gaze fell on Laquisha. Although he'd spoken to her in the past, he hadn't paid much attention to this woman before. Now, he could do nothing but take notice. His eyes looked her up and down, drinking in the beauty he had never noticed before. Laquisha was also a rare fairy-like figure with the typical neat and tidy hair. She also had a delicate, beautiful face. She wore a simple dress with a dark pattern on it, and was wrapped in a long elegant robe. Although she was lying on the ground, her exquisite and curvaceous figure suddenly appeared utterly attractive. "Stop looking at me," Laquisha squealed, as she glared at Zen with a warning in her big, pretty eyes. Caught off guard and snapped out of his thoughts, Zen held his breath and turned his head slowly in order to face the other direction. Although he couldn't see her straight on, his peripheral vision still caught glimpses of her. The calamity-dispelling fragrance had the power to arouse a person's appetite, of course, but it had this same effect on most any desire. Under regular circumstances, only male martial artists would refine their bodies. Because none of these male martial artists had sexual desires for each other before, their desires were thus not enhanced by the wood. Now though, the situation was different. Laquisha was a woman, she was here, and she was ravishing. And that was when Laquisha finally understood Zen's reaction, too. She blushed with embarrassment and decided it was best to chant the heart-purifying spell in order to calm herself down. Was she starting to feel the increased sexual arousal as well? When all the bonfires were flaming high, sending sparks flying in all directions like mini fireworks, it was time for the warriors to face the most painful moment of all. Worse than any form of torment or torture, what they had to face now was the climax of absolute misery. Giant chunks of meat had been hauled up into the air and were now rolling and tumbling over the raging flames. The bonfire feast had begun. As the raw meat began to grizzle beneath the flames and the chunks of fat exploded due to the incredible heat, a smell that made everyone run at the mouth quickly wafted over. The smells, odors and fragrances of the cooking meat was indescribable. To the martial artists, it felt like the devil sitting on their shoulder, whispering in their ear to give in, stirring their most primitive of nerves. I just can't take this anymore. I'm completely starved. Most of the warriors, lying on the ground, were groaning, grunting and screaming. It was clear that they were enduring an unimaginable pain. Genuine torture without the use of any physical weapons. The collapsing mountain race had become accustomed to hearing the martial artists' cries of hunger. Of course, causing them this pain was intentional, but over time their moaning and groaning had become simply annoying. One of the race members walked briskly over to a warrior. "Shut up. he said coldly, resisting the urge to kick him in the ribs at the same time. Do you have the ability? Because if you do, then you can get up, walk right over and enjoy some delicious food and never-ending wine. Isn't that what you want, huh? If you don't have the ability, then you can't have anything to eat or get a drop to drink. And you don't have the ability, isn't that right? So continue lying there obediently. If only they get up, they'd be able to eat the meat, he thought to himself. And over time, this was probably the biggest temptation of all. For any warrior to walk this land, the increased desire to consume food was one of the cruelest trials that they had to go through. And any warrior knew that their lives were filled with harsh treatments and difficult physical and mental tests. This gravitational force and desire were incomparably strong. The warriors' desires were stimulated all while the incredible power of the gravitation pressed down on them. It was simple though: resist the terrifying force of gravitation and be rewarded with giant breakthroughs for body refiners. That was how they truly satisfied their desires. Zen, being a newcomer here, was still highly capable of resisting the temptation of food. Laquisha's alluring figure, though, was another issue. Her silhouette kept flashing before his eyes, and he had to resist the urge to reach for her sexy curves. It's all so troublesome, Zen thought to himself, all while trying as best he could to stifle the desire in his heart and distract his mind. He raised his gaze to the action going on a little further ahead and watched a little while as the members of the collapsing mountain race gobbled their food like savages, tearing at the meat with their teeth. They drank greedily in between mouthfuls, going from tipsy to straight out drunk. There was no wonder the collapsing mountain members were so strong. The strength of their children even surpassed that of an ordinary martial artist. Every member gulped down hordes of meat and food, from the youngest to the very oldest. Zen was sure he had watched one of the younger members fill himself with food twice his weight. Eating was also an extreme talent around here. Of course, the calamity-dispelling fragrance was effective on Zen and the warriors, but it also had effect on the members of the collapsing mountain race. Their desires and needs were multiplied, too. It was obvious that an adult member of the collapsing mountain race could swallow enough meat to fill an entire house. Without the calamity-dispelling fragrance, anyone would burst before consuming that much food. I just want to eat. Zen was beginning to lose himself in his thoughts when suddenly, he noticed a martial artist squirming and struggling on the ground. What was going on? The warrior suddenly stood up. As he did so, two terribly crisp sounds rang through the air, one after the other. Those weren't expecting it covered their ears in surprise. Crack, crack, Zen watched as the warrior's legs began to twist at absurd angles. No bones could fold this way. The warrior's legs were broken in several places, shards of bone pressing against his skin, threatening to pierce it at any given moment. When the martial artist erupted with his full strength, he might have held a chance at temporarily escaping the powerful attraction force. Although his mind might have had the will, his body was not capable of withstanding such vicious strength. The martial artist collapsed to the ground, breaking beneath the interaction between his own powers and that of the attraction force. And at that, Zen finally sighed with emotion. Here, in this world, there was no such thing as a free lunch. Sure, it might be wise to raise one's strength in this divine refinement forbidden land, but one would also have to experience the most brutal oppression and torture. Chapter 1480, Cultivation with Concentration. As expected, no one could escape the effects of the calamity-dispelling fragrance and food. The bodies of many martial artists trembled as they struggled with much resistance. They were all trying to get up desperately. Keeping their goals in mind, they followed their instincts and outdid themselves. Though time didn't seem noticeable due to unchanging seasons, they knew that a lot of days had already been wasted. They had been lying here for years. Every day, they were baptized by the songs of the collapsing mountain race, allowing them to gain a bit of their strength each time. However, the same worked as a daily torture, forcing them to train instinctively, urging them to try getting up and enjoy that delicious food. It might appear as barbaric, but this unique training method seemed to work as an effective stimulus. I want it too. Struggling to get up, another martial artist tried propping himself up from the ground. Being a top-level spirit transformation realm martial artist, he was known to follow the path of body refinement, making him a lot stronger than Zen. This person was relying solely on his own strength to rise. Although he was able to crawl up, he could barely move another muscle afterwards. His feet seemed to stick to the ground, making it extremely difficult for him to even move a single step. The man continued to shuffle, staggering like he was drunk, but he did manage to walk. It was rare to see anyone getting up and standing amidst this pool of warriors lying on the ground. Their expressions revealed extreme resentment as their eyes failed to hide their envy. Under such circumstances, it was very difficult for anyone to maintain their true nature. Holding his stomach, Zen swallowed as he felt the rumbling sound from within. The truth was, he was unable to bear the hunger. The wine jars were impossible to miss, standing as tall as a person. As soon as they were opened, a strong aroma wafted out from them. Ordinary wines never enticed the warriors at all. However, the strong wines of the collapsing mountain race were not some typical wines. They were made from the bones of all kinds of ferocious beasts, making a wild and primal scent combination which was quite tempting. With the aromas of roast meat and wines, as well as the calamity-dispelling fragrance, everyone's mouth ended up all watery. I will give it a try as well," Zen declared, releasing the power of the dragon scales again. He felt rather regretful now. The second time he joined the celestial position race, the clansmen had collected quite a number of weapons, enough for him to light up a lot of dragon scales. But in the end, he decided to accumulate enough heavenly essence, helping the 9 dragons refine their heavenly bodies. If it wasn't for that, Zen would have had more power of the dragon scales to borrow and use. He tried to concentrate, focusing his mind on his goal. Taking a deep breath and using all his strength, Zen crawled up with great difficulty. Pressing both his hands on the ground, he lifted his body up. Although he could temporarily resist the gravitational force, the rate at which he consumed his strength was extremely fast. He could feel cold sweat building on every inch of his body. The energy contained in the dragon scales was not limitless, but it was much more potent and vigorous than Zen's. He felt that his own strength depleted in just a few seconds, but the dragon scales hadn't dimmed yet. Their energy was his now, and it was enough for him to trust he could make it. Plop! Just as he stood up, Zen suddenly fell to the ground. Hearing the sound from behind him, the warrior who was struggling to walk forward turned his head to find Zen lying on the ground. Unable to hide his amusement, he let out a few hollow laughs before continuing his walk towards the huge bonfire in the square, never wanting to look back. The meaning behind the laughter was very clear. Zen was a newcomer, and unlike the rest of the warriors there, he had only been there for a day. To add to that, he was merely in the spirit supreme realm, yet he wanted to climb up to eat the meat. Zen's face heavily smashed onto the ground. If it wasn't for the fact that his head was as tough as a divine weapon, the fall would have caused him a great injury. Even so, he felt dizzy as stars danced before his eyes. I need to rely on my own strength. Just as frustration dawned on him, a hint of enlightenment struck him at lightning speed, making his heart skip a beat. Some of the powers were not supposed to be his, like the power of the cyan dragon. He had to borrow the power of the 9 dragons now. But they would leave him one day. The trial before him was undoubtedly a torture, possibly even driving anyone insane, but he believed it was the best trial. Thinking that one day he would easily leave the collapsing mountain race's territory, it only meant that his strength and physical body had reached their full potential. Unfortunately, he was not able to eat any meat tonight. Staring at the dark skies above him, Zen felt the cold breeze brush past him. The nights in the Divine Refinement Forbidden Land varied in length. The first night lasted approximately 132 hours, while tonight was only 14 hours. The members of the collapsing mountain race seemed to never know fatigue. They tucked into meat and wine under the bonfire for 10 hours, greatly torturing Zen and Laquisha. When their meal was finally over, all the martial artists, including Zen, were covered in sweat, as if they were about to collapse from exhaustion. Many of the martial artists had powerful souls and no longer needed to sleep. But they had to constantly withstand the powerful gravitational force here. Moreover, they were tormented by the calamity-dispelling fragrance before, so they all fell into a deep sleep now. Zen was no exception. 4 hours after, the sky started to light up again. And so, along with the songs the collapsing mountain members sang, a new day began. On the second day, when Zen saw Uncle Toad luring the children to share their meat pieces, he suddenly knew why the other martial artists were envious of Uncle Toad the day before. Zen couldn't deny that he was also tempted to trick the children into giving him some. However, he gave up on second thought. He found this method too tiring and inefficient. It would be better if he could stand up. That way, he would have unlimited access to meat and wine. Lost in his thoughts, Zen lay motionless, his eyes closed. He wasn't in a hurry, but Laquisha was. Zen, you better think of a way to stand up quickly, Laquisha commented, interrupting his thoughts. I don't want to waste any more time here. Isn't this a good place? Zen laughed. If you can stand up and master the terrifying power of the collapsing mountain members, I think that will greatly enhance your strength. Laquisha snorted coldly, I don't need to refine my body. If I needed to improve the strength of my physical body, then I should not have wasted my time here. Based on a warrior's condition, there were many ways to cultivate their strength. Laquisha believed that being tortured was probably the worst choice. But I need to refine my body, answered Zen. Even if he could really stand up, Zen would not choose to leave so quickly. He believed there was a lot more he could gain in this place. Laquisha instantly became anxious but decided to zip her mouth shut. The last thing she wanted to do was waste time here. You can get someone to take you out. Given your status, I'm pretty sure you should be able to do it, right? Zen suggested. It wasn't that he didn't want to help Laquisha. Time was precious to both of them. As Zen said, Laquisha could get out if she wished to. Besides the oldest inhabitants of the collapsing mountain race, there were also many outsiders. Some, who went out to hunt with the collapsing mountain members, were even from the divine land. Laquisha had a special status. All she needed was to ask for help, and she would be able to leave at any time. But only you can take me to the soul-suppressing cliff, Laquisha said, pursing her lips. If it was her will, she would not be staying here. However, the celestial soul's prophecy advised that she had to follow Zen. It would be meaningless for her to leave the collapsing mountain alone. With Zen being the most important figure, she would need to go out with him at all costs. Zen shook his head. You picked the wrong person. I have no idea where the soul-suppressing cliff is. How am I supposed to bring you there? Hearing what he said, Laquisha glared resentfully at Zen, but decided to keep quiet. Thinking about it, Laquisha wasn't so worried at all. Zen did not know why she needed to go to the soul-suppressing cliff. If Kenan and the others were still alive, they would find her sooner or later. Until that time, she would think of other ways to persuade Zen. If worse came to worst, she would take Zen away by force. The next day went by in a flash, and the same routine repeated at night, which was another ordeal for the martial artists. Despite the torture, the gravitational force there was of great benefit to Zen. As the gravity continued to exert force onto his body, it continuously formed the primordial energy. And on the second day, under the baptism of the collapsing mountain race's songs, the primordial energy flowed evenly through his body. The only problem was that, even with this flow of energy, his divine weapon body had not been further strengthened to the next level. Last time he swallowed Laquisha's flames. Maybe the flames he swallowed weren't enough, or the primordial energy within his body wasn't enough, or maybe it was the combination of both. Can you condense your flames again? He requested Laquisha. They had been there for a week now, and Zen felt that he had accumulated enough primordial energy to handle her flames. If his physical body improved once again, it would benefit him more. On the other hand, Laquisha already noticed the special features of Zen's body. He was not afraid of the preternatural flames in her body, and the countless tiny runes on his body could constantly absorb her flames. Somehow, he must have cultivated a technique that required him to swallow these preternatural flames. He needed her help now. Narrowing her eyes, she answered with a smile, "My pleasure."